This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to LBC. Shall we, listen, it's a bit untraditional, but let's just get Idiot's Corner filled up first, shall we, this morning, so that I don't have to spend the rest of the hour dealing with people like David in Newcastle. Oh, it's a benefit of leaving the EU. I bet you won't admit this or read it out, James. So we have got a smaller tariff imposed upon us than the European Union does as a result of a calculation that I'll explain to you in a moment. But if you think that this even begins to nibble at the edges of the economic harm done to us by Brexit, then, well, I don't even have a bridge to sell you. I've got some magic beans that you might want to buy. I've got a 44. I'll sell you Tower Bridge by tea time, David. And I have a modicum of sympathy for your stupidity, because if the British media had dedicated even a fraction of the energy to explaining the economic impacts of Brexit that it has already displayed in explaining the potential economic impacts of Donald Trump's tariffs, which could, of course, disappear in a week or a month or a year, then nobody would be as daft as David. So he can go and open up. I'll give him the keys. There you go, mate. You go and open up. Anybody else who thinks that this is a vindication of becoming the first population in the history of humanity to vote to impose economic sanctions on itself could go right into Idiot's Corner with David while the grown-ups get on with discussing the facts. And for the facts, I'm grateful to a couple of people today who I don't know personally, but who I have encountered on the internet, in the sphere of expertise on the internet, one of whom is a senator in Connecticut and the other of whom is a respected business writer. And it's to the business writer that we turn first, because I read this and I thought, you never learn, do you? I thought, it can't be. That is so crass and so simplistic that it must be an exaggeration. I didn't. I'd be fibbing if I told you that I thought somebody had got April Fool's Day out by a factor of about 24 hours. But I did think it can't be that, can it? So a chap called James Surovicki calculated exactly where these fake tariff rates has come from. Because make no mistake, they're not reciprocal tariffs, even though you've seen that word everywhere in the media and on the BBC even, or Sky. I forget which screen it was that I wandered past yesterday while ranting and raving about the misdeployment of the word reciprocal. So they didn't calculate any tariff rates and non-tariff barriers, which is what they said they'd done. Instead, they took every single country in the world, or every single territory in the world, then took the trade deficit, i.e. the difference between how much is imported from that country and how much is exported to it, and then divided it. So they divided the deficit by that country's exports to us. So 17.9, stay with me at the back, all right? I'll do the numbers as quickly as I can. $17.9 billion trade deficit with Indonesia, and its exports to the US are 28 billion. So 17.9 divided by 28 equals 64%, which Trump claims is the tariff rate that Indonesia charges us. It is it is almost inexpressibly nonsensical mathematics. But as we've established with Trump in the past, that doesn't matter. If your balance is close to evens, as ours is, then you get the base rate of 10%. So everybody roughly around the area of having no deficit at all gets hit with a 10%. And if the deficit is bigger, you get hit with 20 in the case of the European Union, or 60 or 70 odd in the case of China and Indonesia, as I've just explained. So that's point one. They've been calculated in a way that makes back of the envelope Crayola crayon scrawlings look like the work of Isaac Newton, look like Albert Einstein's finest moment. And then it is to a Connecticut senator, a senator from Connecticut, that I turn next, a chap called Chris Murphy, because this is what finally makes sense of things. And this isn't Idiot's Corner. This is clarification. And I could be wrong, but I think the reason why some countries that you might expect to be on the list are not on the list is because they're already sanctioned. So the trade equation is already very different from. So I don't think we read too much into it when it comes to the absence of Russia from the list of countries facing tariffs, because the sanctions have already gone much further than any tariff might do. I am open to correction, education, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. I'm groping around in the dark almost as much as you are on stuff like this, which is why I turn to people who know what they're talking about first and foremost, because this is the bit that makes sense of it all. Okay? This is where it becomes hard to deny that it is both a shakedown and a protection racket. Two classic tactics of mafiosi since time immemorial, or gangsters, crooks. It's a shakedown and a protection racket. So what this guy, and I've shared this on Blue Sky this morning, at Mr. James OB is the address that you need. They are not economic policy. And that is why it doesn't matter that the calculations used to introduce it are so ridiculous, so silly. They are not designed to do that. This guy contends, I think with some justification, that they are a tool to collapse democracy. Now, that might prove to be hyperbole, but the claim that they're meant to compel loyalty, that is the one that's worth examining from every business that will need to petition Trump for relief. So they don't make economic sense. It's going to be very, very weird. So the economics editor of the BBC, Faisal Islam, who's a brilliant journalist, quite correctly describes this as the biggest change to global trade in 100 years. But that doesn't mean that the tariffs themselves will make economic sense in any meaningful way. Everybody gets hurt, up to and including every single American consumer who's going to see a huge array of what they are able to purchase increase in price as a direct consequence of tariffs being imposed on the importation of those goods. And of course, if the dollar goes up as a consequence of people having to spend more money, then the likelihood of people transferring manufacturing or industry to the United States goes down because it becomes too expensive to do so. But you see what I did there? I'm trying to make economic sense of it. That's what you do. What do you do if you're an economics editor? What do you do if you're paid to provide insights into the world of world of finance? You have to try to make sense, which is what we did on Tuesday. I, as you know, I shouldn't go on about this, but I found it a curiously unsatisfying hour, despite being very grateful for the quality of the calls, because I think that we had taken a cricket bat to a game of water polo. I think we were trying to make sense of things in economic terms, and they don't make sense. This is not an economic policy, it is a political policy. It is a political policy designed to allow Donald Trump to swerve some of the checks and balances that the founding fathers of the United States of America put in place to protect the population from dictatorship or monarchy, from a leader who had the ability to use the exchequer to punish and to reward the favoured and to punish those who had displeased the leader. That's why, and you don't need to be a particular genius to understand this, you just have to go and see Hamilton. That's why the founding fathers put the power of spending and taxation in the hands of the legislature. They'd seen kings use spending and taxes to control their subjects. It's why they got rid of George III. Isn't it? It's literally why the American Revolution happened, because of the King of England's heavy taxation of the colonies in order to punish them for talking about independence and for dreaming of self-governance. So, pour encourager les autres, we're going to stamp all over you, and you will therefore stop talking about... Again, it takes you back to Hamilton. You'll stop talking about independence and you'll remember to be so grateful for my leadership. It's one of my favourite scenes in Hamilton, actually, when George III does his little solo. So they use taxation to reward loyalty and punish dissent. Okay? That's how the revolution happened. You can weaken democracy by using it in exactly the same way. So we already know that he's bullying universities, he's bullying law firms, he's bullying state and local governments into making pledges of loyalty, into bending the knee. We talked a bit about this yesterday. They are frightened. They will lose business. And it's a really brutal lesson, but for almost everybody, the bottom line matters more than almost everything else. Morality. Look how quickly people have abandoned their diversity, equity and inclusion programs, things designed to improve the sum total of human existence on this planet. Doesn't matter. He doesn't like it, we'll get rid of it. Law firms being punished with the withdrawal of business if they don't make pledges to Donald Trump. Almost all of them rolling over. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. So the harder they fall, the more likely they are to roll over, to avoid the full impact of the fall. He's doing it to universities, individual students, law firms, state and local governments. Elon Musk just spent millions of dollars trying to buy an election in Wisconsin. He failed. But that's what they want to do. You need independent lawyers. You need independent universities. You need independent media to protect the population from monarchy, from untrammeled monarchy. Not our kind of monarchy, but George III kind of monarchy. You need media, law. You need education to protect objective truth and allow dissent, both of which Trump hates. He hates objective truth. You know that. He calls it fake news. He invented alternative facts in order to fight against objective truth. And he hates dissent. You know that, because anybody who speaks up against him, he will not rest until they have been broken. It is a counterbalance to a powerful federal government. They are the weapons that the population has. It's why the worst kind of extremists on the right and the left will go after judges, often first. You know, whether it's Suella Braverman talking about lefty lawyers or whether it's Donald Trump essentially saying, nice business you got there, be a shame if something happened to it. Anybody who despises democracy goes after judges and journalists and educators. Judges, journalists, educators first, right? That's already happening. No big surprise there. So where does the private sector come into the picture? How does the private sector fit into this program of oppression? Answer: independence. Can't be independent. It's a big deal. Look at who was sitting behind him at the inauguration. The most powerful business people in the United States of America. They are probably, particularly in a world where the Democrats are in absolute disarray and leaderless, let alone leaderless, they're rudderless. Who can actually hurt him? Imagine if Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos or Tim Cook from Apple or Bill Gates, who hasn't, of course, bent the knee. But imagine if any of them decided to move against Trump in the way that they have moved for him. It's just an illustration of how independent businesses can be a threat to dreams of autocracy. So what does he have to get them to do? He needs them to pledge loyalty. Why are they going to pledge loyalty? To get relief from the sanctions. So I don't know how it's going to work. That's the problem with the ripping up of the rule book, with the upending of the world order, with the end of 100 years of global trade norms. Will individual companies be able to get exemptions on this? I think they will. I think you'll be able to say, no, they will still have to pay. If you're importing those cars, you will, or if you're a car manufacturer importing parts, you will still have to pay, but I'm going to give a dispensation to my good patriotic friends at Tesla. Tesla are not going to have to pay. So then what does the guy who's still paying do? He comes and says, what do I have to do? So this is, I think, correct. The phone lines are open. I could have gone mad. I could have got it all horribly wrong. And I am leaning very heavily upon the explanation from this Connecticut senator with a few little side orders of my own, one of which is Vladimir Putin. So you know the story of Vladimir Putin. He comes to power. The West is happy. It looks like he's going to be actually quite a liberal leader. It looks like he's going to open up Russia for trade and investment. It looks like he's going to be a modern westward looking. It's hard to believe now, but that was true at the time. First thing he does, locks up one of the oligarchs suspected of corruption, sticks him on trial in a cage in Moscow. What do all the other oligarchs do? They phone Vladimir Putin and they say, how do I avoid that fate, sir? And Vladimir Putin says, easy, give me half. Now, Trump's not going to be shaking it down in quite such a bold sense, because we still have journalists, judges, educators with power in the United States of America. But the principle is exactly the same. What do I do? What do I need to do to avoid that fate, boss? Give me half. Translate it into Trumpish. Translate that Putin tactic into Trumpish, and the answer becomes bend your knee. Support my economic policies. Publicly pledge your loyalty to me. Tell the world, tell your customers, tell the voters that my economic policies are brilliant. And maybe a few contributions to my political efforts, which I've already admitted are potentially contemplating a constitution-shredding tilt at a third term. What did Vladimir Putin do? He upended the Russian constitution, such as it was, in order to become effectively president for life. And then we'd quite like you to keep an eye on your employees and what they're doing. I don't like this DEI, but I also don't like opinion. So if you are going to be exempted from these tariffs, then you need to prove to me that your employees have had their freedoms curtailed. I don't want any of your employees criticizing me, says the president, to the chief executive who wants to be spared the tariffs. So the chief executive says that's absolutely fine. So I'll make it perfectly clear, just as some university leaderships have made it clear, that we will be clamping down on dissent. We will be silencing opinion. We will be policing freedom of speech. So the tariffs create hardship. And then Donald Trump moves into the space occupied by the hardship and says, I'm here to help. He gets what he wants. In Putin's case, it was half of the oligarchs' fortunes. In Trump's case, it's all the things I've listed and no doubt some things that I haven't, and announces that he's lifting that tariff. He is taking his foot off the throat of that business or that sector, that industry, or even perhaps that individual. Whether this also extends to his dealings with other countries, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. Come on, I'm doing pretty well at 10.19. You can't expect me to bring that into the conversation as well. But he then arrives and says, I'm going to take my foot off your throat. I'm going to remove those tariffs, and therefore you will be in a better position commercially. In return, you will give me whatever I ask for. It is a thumbscrew. The lawyers, the colleges, and industry, then all under his thumb. How are you going to maneuver? What does opposition look like in a world where the president has got the educators, the journalists, and the judges running scared, and the industrialists entirely on side? Not a coincidence that the people sitting behind him at his inauguration were the business people, the billionaires, not the actual politicians who would be enacting his so-called vision. And the scary thing is, none of this is new. I've just pointed out the Putin connections, but you show me any autocrat, any democratically elected leader who dreamed of staying in power forever, and I will show you this playbook. Even if it was a bogus democracy that got you into the top job, like Vladimir Putin, he still needs to rig the system to stay there. Trump this week talked about staying there, and this week launched an attack upon the private sector in the United States of America that is designed to demolish, dismantle, or at the very, very least, dilute democracy. Okay? That's not an opinion, that's counting. So what should Keir Starmer do? And that is the question, I'm afraid. It's not to be or not to be. Not today. It's what should Keir Starmer do? I don't want to say to you that I think he's getting it right, because you'll accuse me of footballification and you'll accuse me of being biased. But what else can he do but sit there making all the right noises about hoping to secure some sort of dispensation, while privately acknowledging that what they're really doing is sitting as tight as they possibly can until the whole thing falls apart, which it almost certainly will. And that almost is where the world turns. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to add to my analysis, to challenge it, or more helpfully, perhaps, to talk about where this leaves the United Kingdom. Where does this leave the United Kingdom? And what should our Prime Minister be doing? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. I think Starmer is doing what he always does, and that is prioritising pragmatism over anything that remotely resembles ideology. He's not coming out fighting, partly because he can't. We are a diminished economy as a consequence of not being in the European Union anymore. There's no strength in isolation, so we can't link arms with Ursula von der Leyen and promise to hit Trump where it hurts. We can't do what Mark Carney is doing because we're not that close to the United States of America. So what can we do? We can do what he's doing. And I really want you to tell me why that bit's wrong as well, because I'd love to think that there was more that we as a country could do. So there it is. That is what I think is happening. What do you think is happening? And what do you think the Prime Minister should be doing, up to and including the path that he currently follows? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973. Am I not supposed to pronounce the second C in Connecticut. Is that correct? I'm not supposed to pronounce. Do you know why I pronounce it? Because I was only about 52 years old when I noticed it. It's a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. It's the classic Mark Twain novel. It's a beautiful. But I know it's 1023, Keith. Stop shouting at me. But that's why I pronounce the C, because I've only recently realised that it's there. Now I'm going to have to unpronounce it again because it's a silent C. It's 1023.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:25 is the time. You can thank me later for explaining absolutely everything that's happening with regard to these so-called tariffs, and then you can cancel out your disappointment with my performance on Tuesday if you had any, and then we can get stuck into unpicking it and working out what our Prime Minister should be doing differently, if, and I mean this most sincerely, folks, if anything. John's in Edinburgh. John, what do you reckon?
Hi, how you doing?
Well, there's a question. You carry on. I'll think about it.
I think that Keir Starmer has got to work with the international community and the wider international community, not just Europe, but also, say, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, okay? Australia, New Zealand, okay? I think you've got to look at where Trump's power is coming from, and his power at the moment is coming from the oligarchs that sat behind him at his inauguration. Okay?
Yeah.
So what I think we've got to do is to take it down the oligarchs. Do it Garibaldi. Garibaldi never went for the top guy, always went for those underneath him. Okay? And to say, we're going to develop, Europe has put in, 800 billion they've talked about for defence? Just take $1 billion of that, just $1 billion of that, and develop a new Facebook, a new X, a new Amazon, basically the people who sat behind them have damaged our children. We know that. Yes. And now they're damaging our economies. Okay, fine. So develop a completely new way, a new version of this, putting in all of the security things that we need and they refuse to do. So start from base one again. It can be done in a couple of weeks, I guess.
Well, I think that's a bit. Also, you can't build up the following and the audience. Getting some people off Facebook will be like trying to get the eggs out of a baked cake. But I understand your central point.
You can if you ban them.
You can't ban them. That involves epic infringements of freedom. Oh, you can ban them for doing things like not properly regulating and not properly protecting our children and not properly punishing people who incite racism or who. Yeah, okay. So there might be some.
And they've done all of that, so ban them.
There might be some wriggle room there. Do you know what I'm hearing as you speak?
What?
I'm hearing echoes of the conversation that we had when he betrayed Ukraine.
In what way?
I'm glad you asked me that. In the way that the positive in that scenario was that it would actually wean Europe off over-dependence upon the United States militarily. So the calculation by the sensible ones was that although Trump is behaving like a petulant child, the silver lining might be that the European, I don't want to say union, but the European peoples, the European governments, including the United Kingdom, would actually start doing more heavy lifting. Pax Americana is over. European defence needs a complete rethink, and that in the long run would be a good thing. And that's exactly what you've just described with regard to the economy. The only difference being that the people on Trump's side who talked about it being necessary for Europe to recalibrate and to wean itself off over dependence on the United States don't seem to have thought that the same calculations might apply to matters economic as they do to matters military. So I like your theory. I like it. But I don't know how long it takes, and it involves doing something, and it criticises Keir Starmer for currently deciding to do nothing, right?
I think if you have a Facebook that wants to spy on people and affect elections, it would cost a lot of money and a lot of time to do that. But if you want a Facebook to be in its basic format that we all really want, I guess a couple of weeks would take.
Well, that's the bit where I think you're being a little bit over-optimistic. But the idea of offering up some sort of alternative to the plutocracy that is now presided over, it's an oligarchy that is now presided over by these ludicrously wealthy men who are not satisfied. Elon Musk trying to buy a seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, literally trying to buy a seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. When did that become okay? When did that become normal? Answer: when the public discourse, when the ecosystem of American politics became a place dedicated almost entirely to trying to turn Donald Trump into some form of latter-day monarch, a Putin-esque figure or an emperor. Democratically elected leaders who very quickly move to stay in post forever are not rare. Just apropos nothing in particular, Benjamin Netanyahu is currently visiting Viktor Orban in Hungary. It's coming up to 10:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:32 is the time. I missed one bit out. You'd think in a 23-minute monologue I might have been able to hit all of my marks, but there is one other bit of it that fits with the analysis I have shared you with, and which essentially renders official the speculation about the stupid way in which these so-called tariffs had been calculated. Indeed, if you go to the Office of the United States Trade Representative, you will see in terms the following words: to conceptualize reciprocal tariffs, the tariff rates that would drive bilateral trade deficits to zero were computed, and then they describe the process that I described to you earlier. The economics writer, former economics editor over at Newsnight, Duncan Weldon, describes, well, it uses 4 words to sum it up: this is just stupid. And then goes a little further, presumably done in 10 minutes, fairly obviously working backwards from the intended outcome. So it's the worst kind of economics. You say, what do you want to happen? Okay, now justify it using numbers. And the numbers they use are objectively ridiculous. It is no more sophisticated than a back of a fag packet design or a back of a fag packet calculation designed to justify Donald Trump's weird impulses in this space. And by weird, I mean probably dictatorial. Tell me I'm wrong. 03456060973. And then if we add a question, and we may not need to, but if we do, I'd love to know what you think is going to happen next. But for now, what is going on? What should Keir Starmer do? Sometimes there is only one question in town. I pride myself, as you know, on trying to ask questions that perhaps you weren't expecting, trying to ask questions that take us to places we wouldn't otherwise have visited. But sometimes you peel the onion and it leads you to exactly the same place as people who haven't bothered to peel it at all. What should Keir Starmer do? What can he do is a slightly different question. And what should he do? It's probably easier to answer. Max is in Gothenburg in Sweden. Max, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
nice
Max.
to speak to you.
Likewise. Who murdered?
You're more brought up.
Carry on.
I'm sorry, it's Swedish. You've confused.
All right, back to English.
Yeah, back to English. I also read the article in the BBC yesterday, and I was astonished by its perspicacity. I think you could sum it up basically by saying that Trump sees every deal as adversarial, and it's a winner and a loser, and he's going to win. Whereas everyone else sees it as kind of reciprocal thing, where if you give me that, I'll give you that, and we'll do it this way. So Trump is basically playing conkers, and the rest of the world is playing multi-level chess. And I think in his little addled brain, he thinks that were he erudite, he would think he was cutting the Gordian knot.
Yeah.
But he's not. It's more complicated. The world's moved on since then. I mean, he talks about getting work back, manufacturing back in the USA. It's ridiculous. The tooling's not there to make these things. It's all in China.
The supply chains, which we learned, well, some of us learned a lot about during Brexit. Some people, of course, still have their fingers in their ears and their eyes shut. But the supply chains that auto manufacturers rely on, they break on Saturday morning. The tariffs come in on Friday night. This is why, drawn slightly to the question of what happens next, I'm just not clear on how much expertise you need to answer it. And it's why I don't think, and I'd probably put a few quid on this, I don't think they're going to stay in place across the board for very long. I think he'll start taking them off almost as quickly as he's brought them in. But yeah, who are these companies that are suddenly going to uproot and return to the United States of America or start manufacturing in the United States of America?
My wife works for an American company in automotive supply. It's cabling inside the, and she's constantly on meetings and Zoom and everything with China. And we're worried. I mean, she can always get a job in the defence industry in Sweden. Okay. Because that's where they're recruiting people now.
Of course it is. As a consequence of his last sort of brain freeze.
Yep. But that would involve moving to another town, and she doesn't want to do that. But I think it'd be worth it. Well,
I don't want to get involved in your domestic issues, Max. I feel that would be inappropriate at this juncture, unless your wife wants to join us on the extension, in which case I'd be happy to mediate. But absent that, the point about American auto manufacturers being reliant upon Chinese goods, which the manufacturers are now going to have to pay 67% tariffs on to simply get them into the what's it called, the just-in-time supply lines that they've been relying on for years, if not decades.
Yep.
It's like every rock you look under has got 100 rocks underneath it.
That's what I mean. It's multi-level chess.
Multi-level chess.
It's not conkers.
No, not from this side of the deal, but from his side it is. I'll hurt you and you'll do what I want.
Yeah, precisely. I've got the biggest conkers in the world.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Max. But as I said, I'm not interested in getting involved in your domestic disputes. It's 10:38. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Gary, it takes up Max's theme. Trump only understands bartering. The complexity of the flow of money and value is too much for his one-dimensional brain to comprehend. So he's playing conkers. Everybody else is playing reality. And this is why, and I may regret this, this is why I think what we might loosely describe as the economic establishment is on a bit of a hiding to nothing at the moment. The big penny drop moment for me this week was that distillation of the detail down to why is he doing it? Because he can. And we've expanded on that today and introduced the possibility of an ambition that has nothing to do with economy and everything to do with power, retention of power. But the idea that you're going to be bringing your set squares and your compasses, and what else did you have in your little geometry set when you were, and your little ruler and your pencil sharp, bringing all the tools that economists and brilliant economic journalists and economic analysts, bringing all the tools they usually bring to a situation, and they're showing us how if you turn that wheel there, then that cog there will start spinning. And I don't think it matters, lads. I really don't. There has been some good journalism, but it's largely the kind of throw your arms up in the air and say what the hell is going on and then start picking at the edges kind of journalism. You can't treat this like you treat normal political decisions because it's not a normal political decision. And how many times have we found ourselves in recent years sitting here going, why are we still trying to deploy the traditional means, the traditional modes of analysis to a situation that is not traditional? 10:39 is the time. Peter is in Ipswich. Peter, what do you think?
Hi, James. I think we should really stand up to America. I think that it's time for us to turn our backs on America. I think that effectively America is only where it is through the support of its allies, and our allies need to turn our backs. America's always been an unperfect partner. It says it's the defender of the free world and the defender of freedom of speech, but it's always had a history of double standards, particularly around race. In this particular context of trade, this is no difference to the turn of the 20th century. Effectively, when America created the Federal Reserve in 1914, it became the reserve currency. Britain, the British Empire, was the strongest empire and the strongest military, but they overtook us in respect to reserve currency by 1918 financially, because we were fighting wars and they lent us money. If you go back to 1944,
I am fascinated. I am fascinated by this, and we covered some of it last week, and the Marshall Plan being a fairly hefty. Hang on a minute, being a hefty. Don't interrupt me when I'm interrupting you. Being a hefty punctuation mark. But when you say we should stand up to America and we should fight back, you mean that you and me should be paying more for things that we're currently paying less for, because that's the only weapon we've got.
No, we can create a new reserve currency. Europe can create a reserve currency. The Alliance of the Willing can create a new reserve currency. Canada, Japan, South Korea. We don't have to trade in dollars.
This is a bit like your man talking about building a brand new Facebook in 2 weeks. How long, realistically, how long is that going to take?
These things can be done extremely quickly. They were done very extremely quickly in 1944.
By one country.
They can be done extremely quickly when necessity needs it.
Not by 40 countries, some of whom are still going to be sucking up to the Mango Mussolini in the hope of getting a special dispensation or a let-off. And what happens if we start this wheel turning? I'm being pessimistic. I hope I'm not being rude. And then 2 weeks down the line, he starts lifting the tariffs off the people or the industries, the sectors that have done his bidding.
The fundamental thing that's changed here is not the fact of Donald Trump. The fundamental thing that's changed in America is the Republican Party. The Republican Party is no longer a trusted partner. Effectively, the day the Republican Party moved down this road is the day that America turned its back on the Allies. And effectively, we have to recognise this is a declaration of war in a different way. It's a trade war. It's not missiles. It's not bombs at present, but it's certainly going to cause harm. And effectively, we no longer can give the reserve currency status to America.
Because it's abnegated its rights to hold that position. It's like
Correct.
we are. It's the second caller that has made me think that we're looking at the economic equivalent of the end of Pax Americana. And it's not, I mean, I'd possibly go further than you on one thing and say it's not really the Republican Party that's changed, although of course it has. It's our understanding of what's possible in the context of that alliance that's changed beyond redemption and beyond reversal.
There is a huge opportunity here for the Alliance of the Willing, for countries like Canada, for countries like Britain, for countries like Japan, all right, who for years have succeeded to America's will. Effectively, if these countries came together in a new alliance of the willing to make a trading partner and make an actual success of the world economy, there's huge opportunities available. We need to be starting to talk about hope, not fear. There is great hope in this scenario. And hope is what the world needs, not more fear.
Hope is definitely what the world needs, and you're not alone in that optimistic reading of the situation. I've seen a couple of people suggesting today that this could be good news for Europe and Asia if the opportunity is grasped. I don't have the stones, I don't have the knowledge to pontificate really on how easy or how hard it is to do some of the things that callers have suggested today, but I think that we can all agree that the choice between doing nothing and doing something seems fairly obvious, and that leads us back to the question which everyone and no one has answered directly today, which is what should Keir Starmer do? The answer appears to be, if we were to reach for any form of consensus, and consensus of course is the cousin of optimism, the answer seems to be he's got to do something, and that means that doing nothing, the current plan, is probably wrong. It's 10:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
47 is the time. Perhaps a brief moment looking at some of the other characters in this cast. The people claiming that the cessation of freedom is somehow Liberation Day. Literally an unprecedented assault on free trade being described as Liberation Day. I wonder whether we owe each other an apology for citing Orwell too much too soon. They used to talk about the great lines. What was it? They told you to ignore the evidence of your own eyes and ears. It was the party's final, most terrible command. And we almost used it a little bit kind of gleefully or performatively. Well, aren't we clever? So, I say aren't we clever? I'd say 99% of people who cite George Orwell on social media have never read a book that the bloke wrote, which is kind of apt when you think about so many of the messages in his books, or certainly the role of Big Brother in public discourse. But hey-ho, that's probably a conversation for another day. But, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, all of those things. Now he's saying cessation of freedom of trade is Liberation Day. He's literally, as Tom Sorbett just explained rather well in that clip that you heard, he's literally trying to say that me putting high taxes on you, increasing the amount of money you'll have to pay to go shopping to the American people is liberation or freedom. It is close to extraordinary, isn't it? And yet it's there. So some of the other characters in the cast, when relatively normal fools and liars are exposed to scrutiny, they don't cope with it as well as massively abnormal fools and liars like Donald Trump. Donald Trump is unique. Those levels of narcissistic self-delusion are unique. So it is interesting to see how some of his cronies and allies cope when they are put in the spotlight and lack his ability to call a spade a banana. And take half the room with him. So here is the Secretary of State for Commerce, a chap called Howard Lutnick, who again is worth looking up to find out what his track record is and how lily white his commercial and historic performances have been. Here he is. Well, I'm not even going to give you the context of this. I just want to introduce you to him. So meet Howard Lutnick, the United States Secretary of Commerce.
I mean, the European Union won't take chicken from America. They won't take lobsters from America. They hate our beef because our beef is beautiful and theirs is weak.
Okay, weak beef. That's my first band, actually, at school. It was called Weak Beef. So that is what happens when you're asked to provide substance or logic to decisions that are built entirely without substance or logic. The people sent out to defend it have to say really stupid things like that. And the kind of people still cheering for Brexit, the American equivalents of the kind of people still cheering for Brexit, will cheer that. Yay! Weak beef! Down with weak beef, you cheese-eating surrender monkeys! Our beef is beautiful! And of course, think about the logical impact of what that man just said. They don't like our beef because it's beautiful. Just run me through that, will you, Howie? How does the beauty of something make it less attractive? So anyway, that's one of them. And now the Secretary of the Treasury, a chap called Scott Bessent. So it falls to me the unpleasant duty of introducing you to the United States Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent.
The cars, all foreign-made cars, imports, are getting a 25% tariff starting at midnight. If half the cars coming into the United States are foreign-made, that's hard to turn around overnight, as you know. So what would you say to people in the auto industry who are worried about that timeline and how quickly that could shift?
Buy American.
Ford, of course, is American. 25%, and that will apply to anything coming from this country as well, which is another reason why we had to put old David in Idiot's Corner at first early doors this morning, because as far as I've been able to establish, and I've seen Lewis Goodall doing some good work in this field, the car stuff is what happened yesterday is in addition to what had already happened. So we're already looking at 25% tariffs on anything that we are sending into the United States. That would be most obviously hitting companies like Jaguar Land Rover. Buy American. 10:52 is the time. Sam's in Tooting. Sam, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So I think I do agree with the last caller in that actually we do need to take a stand.
What
against
does that
this.
look like?
I think that if you look at other countries' responses like Japan, South Korea and China getting together and having a unified plan on how they're going to respond to Donald Trump's tariffs,
Yes.
These are three historic enemies. They have been able to come together and recognize that this is a time to do something together. Why are we not able to do that with our closest allies? We don't need to be in the single market and customs union to then think about how are we going to respond as a unit in order to stand up.
Are you sure
to this?
they've done that? I know the Japanese government have said they're going to help domestic industry deal with the fallout of it, but they've given no indication whatsoever of retaliation yet, mate, as far as I know.
I don't know whether they've indicated retaliation yet, but I know that you just said Lewis Goodall's done some good work.
Yes,
if
always.
they have not come together, then you have to blame him because he's my source. So.
Oh, okay. I'm just looking
Yeah.
at what that might mean. They might act collectively to improve the situation for domestic industries, but that could be tax cuts at home. It doesn't have to be anything that is designed to actually hurt the United States of America, so it wouldn't be taking a stand.
But I think that even the fact that they are working together in response to, because this is without doubt in
cooperation.
response to America.
So it might not be taking a stand, but it is cooperation.
And we should be able to do the same. And I think that if you look at what we can actually do to retaliate, there is quite a lot. There is a lot that we can actually be very targeted about, because Trump's attitude and Trump's sort of postulating right now is tariffs on everything, essentially, right? He's going out against absolutely everything, whereas we can be quite targeted. Canada was able to be quite targeted. They still have us as a head of state. Why couldn't Canada, Europe, and the UK all come together to do some sort of very targeted process? If you also think about the kind of, I know it means that we end up paying more, right? I know that. And I know that there's not appetite for suffering in the country, but what we are known for is the country of being the stiff upper lip, and I don't think we like being bullied. I don't think we like the idea of our allies turning against people that we feel really strongly about, like turning against Ukraine, which he has done so strongly. I think there would be appetite to seize this as an opportunity to grow. There is actually an opportunity.
And this is the third time that I've heard echoes of the conversations we had about the betrayal of Ukraine, the abandonment of America's role as a leader on a military stage across the world. You're now echoing some of the silver lining sentiment that we had then when we discussed the economy. It could be good because, you know, it's not the whole world, is it? And it's not even our biggest market. We export much more, I think, even with the restrictions brought in by Brexit, we expect much more to the European Union. And so that recalibration could be a long-term good, but as you've acknowledged, and it's easy, I guess the easier it is for individuals to absorb this, the easier it is for them to espouse it. Short-term pain for long-term gain. But some people will really struggle with the short-term pain, as you well know, Sam.
Yeah, definitely. But think, all right, the other big thing going to Ukraine is their defense industry. They are the number one supplier in the globe. Why couldn't we lean really heavily into that? We want to get manufacturing across the country, and we want to improve jobs across the country. If you actually look at the defence industry, it's something that's dispersed across the whole of the UK. So it's not just in the south, it's not just in the southeast. There is components of defence throughout the whole of the UK that could be really supercharged.
But then, of course, as you know, we automatically start looking at all the red tape and all the unnecessary friction that we've brought into exporting anything to continental Europe. Whether or not that ends up being a rationale for dialing it down, the European Union says, look, all right, we're going to have to be less strict with this third country than we would otherwise be because the facts have changed, and it could be a moment for softening some of the barriers erected as a consequence of Brexit in some specific areas. I agree with you. Whether or not Keir Starmer is keeping two horses running at the same time, none of us know. I think he probably is. So publicly, not actually upsetting Donald Trump yet. Privately, having all sorts of conversations about cooperation and particularly on rearmament, actually. That is kind of happening in public. And it fits with Sam's analysis. And, of course, I suppose some people may need a little bit of evidence. We should, for balance, not everything that Trump said last night was ridiculous. Quite often I found myself thinking, wow, you're a really, what did he call himself, a strong and stable genius? What was the phrase that he used back in the day? A very stable genius? I get it all, mate. So, you know, there were a couple of moments yesterday during that speech with the whole world watching where you thought, God, I wonder whether Americans have ever felt prouder.
But likewise, an old-fashioned term that we use, groceries. I used it in the campaign. It's such an old-fashioned term, but a beautiful term, groceries. It sort of says a bag with different things in it. Groceries went through the roof, and I campaigned on that. I talked about the word groceries for a lot.
Sorry? Okay. Weak beef and groceries. So that sounds like a kind of almost an epitaph, doesn't it, for something quite precious and valuable. Weak beef and groceries, but don't forget the eggs.
Eggs drop now 59%, and they're going down more, and the availability is fantastic. They were saying that for Easter, please don't use eggs. Could you use plastic eggs? I said, we don't want to do that. We want to, and you really came through. It's an amazing job. Thank you very much, Brooke. You did great.
I mean, there is a figure of speech. Younger listeners may not be familiar with it, but the old craze, what's that got to do with the price of eggs? Or would almost apply in those circumstances. You almost don't need to check that he's lying on that one, do you? Or that he's got his facts wrong. But anyway, they went up after he was elected. And we go we come to the news next, actually. I'm minded to carry on with this. I've got a fascinating guest for you at 10:45. And, of course, Mystery Hour will be upon us at 12, which is always fun. But the question that we might move on to next is, what do we think happens next? I've provided a bit of answer to this. I think that we might be surprised at the speed with which these tariffs are reversed. And I don't think I deserve any particular plaudits or prizes for that, because we said yesterday that he seems to approach tariffs in the way that school children approach the hokey cokey. You put your left one in, you take your left one out, in, out, and then, forgive this rather unpleasant mental image, you shake it all about. So who gets them lifted first? And if we are living in a world where the tariffs could be lifted sooner rather than later, does that change the calculations on what Keir Starmer should be doing? In other words, do you bend to the bully in the hope of being spared?
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:03 is the time. This from Joe. You're obviously just jealous of his very, very large A brain. People are saying it's the biggest, most beautiful brain, the likes of which have never been seen before. Strong, powerful, and, oh God, I can't even carry on with this joke. What a plonker he is. Thank you, Joe. That took me on a journey, that text, which I'm glad I read all the way to the end. And another one that I got that grabbed me very, very effectively was one which began, I'm not going to be able to find it now, it began with the words, your colleague said they couldn't put me on air because I'm currently in the bath and everything is echoing. It was from someone called Richard. I'll try and find it in a moment, because that is, again, apart from I love you, James, but, which is the only way you'll ever get criticisms of the programme read out on it. That's not true, is it? It's the only way you'll get your criticisms of the programme read out on air without possibly ending up in Idiot's Corner. I like that one. I couldn't come on air because I'm currently in the bath. So that 25% tariff, as you just heard in the news bulletin, albeit a bulletin that still contained the word reciprocal. Look, it is technically reciprocal because Trump says it is, right? So he says we're doing this because they do that. And that means it is reciprocal in a strange way. But he is not addressing tariffs with tariffs. So it's not. They are not reciprocal tariffs. You could describe it as reciprocal behaviour. Oh, it doesn't matter. Do you even care? It does, doesn't it? So, and this is why I'm really wary of sitting here with far from a proper. I'll tell you what I'm good at. I'm good at madness. I'm good at politics that's bonkers. I'm good at unpicking and explaining. It's why some people who fell for it have sadly still not overcome their natural antipathy towards me. I'm very good at explaining the con. I'm not an economist. And I think that what's happening here is that economists are trying to explain the con. And that's not economics. That's something different. I don't know what that is. That involves speaking to people that have fallen for the con for 20 years and working out why it is that they've fallen for it. It's why this programme in the aftermath of Brexit became something of a beacon. People would ring in with enormous confidence and certainty that what was about to happen would be brilliant. Daniel Hannan, the world's wrongest man, of course. It's nearly come. I think it's June 25th, Daniel Hannan Day. That article he wrote about, it's June the 25th, 2025. And then pages and pages and pages about how brilliantly Brexit had gone and how we were all richer and happier and we'd all grown 3 inches and eating filet mignon for tea every night. He's back. 20th of September 2020, he wrote, Trump's flaws are many, but he'd be better for Britain than Biden. If Biden wins, the free world may find itself longing for a stronger Anglo-American alliance. And then a few moments or a few years later, today, in fact, when the Trump presidency ends in ignominy, a lot of the people now cheerleading him will deny ever having backed it. And I mean, what does that level of self-deception involve? Daniel Hannan cheerleading for Trump. 5 years later, say, a lot of the people that cheerleaded for Trump will deny that they were ever involved in it. Yeah, I'm so clever. Give me a peerage. Too late. Boris Johnson already has. So the world's wrongest man is there today. Yeah, you're right. The truth always matters. So I'm good at explaining the con because I have been blessed over the years with loads of conned people ringing me and trying to tell me why I'm wrong. I don't get it as much with Trump now. I'm reminded of one call that we took, I think, when he was fighting with the mayor of London. And someone said, I don't care that he lies all the time. I just love it because it upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan. So you initially laugh and then you balk a bit, but then years later you realise that's actually quite significant. But I don't know that this is working on that front. I don't know that people who think that they're fans of Donald Trump, because, and let's not beat about the bush here, he's made racism fashionable again. That's the only real reason these people have when push really comes to shove, when you really boil things down to brass tacks, if you'd allow me to mix my metaphors momentarily. What he offers people is a green light for their bigotry. It's why and he means it, I think. It's why the diversity, equity and inclusion program is simultaneously hideous and popular with racists. That's what he has given them. That's what he does. So apart from that, who is going to go, yeah, I'm really glad he's hurting me? And then I think back to the calls I used to take from people who said, I know I'll be poorer, but I don't care because sovereignty. And anyone who is still trying to straddle Brexit and Donald Trump, support for Brexit and support for Donald Trump, is going to have to come up with yet another definition of sovereignty, aren't they? Because this does not make us look very sovereign at the moment. just hoping that we might be exempted from the crass, obnoxious belligerence that he's bringing to bear on every country in the world at the moment. So where does sovereignty slot into that equation? We've probably got less sovereignty alone than we would have had as part of a sovereignty pooled collective. So what happens next? I'm going to add to the mix of questions. What happens next? Genuine. And what we haven't had so far is personally affected people. I think because everything's so confusing, possibly because I've asked the wrong questions. But what is it going to do to someone? I told you, cheese and wine. In the immediate aftermath of Brexit actually being done, remember the oven-ready deal? Good Lord. Speaking of Trump cheerleaders, the oven-ready deal, and it was cheese and wine that hit me first. Cheese exporters and wine importers explaining to me how their businesses were going to be completely decimated. Now, they would survive. I think one of them had to make a big investment in continental Europe and ultimately sold the business. But business people do that. It's why they deserve more respect than they get from some people on the left. Business people keep us all afloat, and they will get through obstacles. So you introduce red tape and regulations, business people have to find ways to cut it. I have a friend who's a greengrocer, actually. There's a word you don't hear very often. Greengrocer. It's like a bag of shopping. So he has to deal with the red tape, and he shows it to me. He sends me pictures of everything that's changed and the difference. But they have to get through it, because if they want to stay in business, they have to deal with the new reality. And all we do is kind of cross our fingers and hope that they'll pull it off. Otherwise, our shelves will be stripped bare and we'll have less stuff to buy. So what is the next stage? What is likely to happen next? And if you can do that from a personal point of view, then I'll make some room for you today on the programme. Do you know yet how this is going to hit your business? There'll be someone listening to this who's got a job a bit like our friend in Gothenburg's wife, who works in the export of car parts or the export of cars. There'll be somebody here who is linked to the Scotch whisky industry, which I'm told is worth $1 billion. Did you know that? $1 billion of Scotch whisky goes out to the United States of America. There are other areas. There'll be somebody listening who is involved in Diageo or Burberry or whatever it is. And do you know yet how it's going to affect you? And what are the small versions? 40% of my business, James, is actually exporting to the United States of America. So now I don't know quite how it's going to affect me, but it's unlikely to be good. Okay, 11:11 is the time. And just in case you're having a bad day, I am here to remind you that it could be worse. You could be Daniel Hannan, who wrote in 2020 that Trump's flaws are many, but he'd be better for Britain than Biden, and wrote this morning that all of the people who are cheerleading for Trump will deny that they ever backed it when the Trump presidency ends in ignominy. Good Lord. Hello, darkness, my old friend. Andy's in Chipping Campden. Andy, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James. I'm a bit miffed. You took my word out of my mouth. I was looking for the madness of King Donald, and he said it was all madness, yeah. With regard to your second question about what happens next, it's all my opinion. I'm not a vastly well-educated man, but all I can do is look at the evidence. And it seems that...
You know what, you're not surprised by groceries?
No.
Well, you're clever enough then. Carry on.
Thank you very much. I think with Trump, he only sort of respects or worships, if you like, strength, but he will only show a beneficial approach to weaker countries, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a sort of Putin playbook, and it's all madness.
Oh, I think we lost the phone line. We'll try and get it back. Let's hop over to Brussels, perhaps appropriately. Ehab is there. Ehab, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Nice talking to you.
Likewise.
Hi. So I just wanted to give you some maybe pointers on how you can counterattack the USA and get what you want, the ace up your sleeve that you don't have. There's two things, James, I can think of. One, and this would be much better if you're part of the EU, so you're not, but if the EU and the UK tell the USA we will reconsider the ban on Chinese telecom suppliers.
You say that. But that ban was because they were suspected of spying on us.
Well, James, that's so. If it was worded like a reevaluation of the policy, just reevaluation of the policy, because there's the I'm a core network engineer, so there's no. This is. Do you really believe, James, that the Chinese government are interested in your phone calls?
No, of course they're not. But they're interested in other people's. And they might be interested in mine. I popped up on a very strange roundup of Putin critics that someone brought to my attention. So it's not beyond because of some of the guests I have on the programme and because of some of the work I've done in that field, not because of any particular courage or bravery on my part. But we spoke yesterday to somebody who Vladimir Putin has sent trained killers or untrained killers, happily for him, after. And not everyone in the media platforms these people. So yeah, actually, journalists will always be the target of enemy governments.
Well,
I don't want to rain on your parade. You asked me a question, I've answered it. There's no earthly way that giving China more access to our private data would be a good response to Donald Trump being an idiot.
That was one area that I think, because I worked for American telecom company before, and they were really worried about China. So I can tell you, in terms of market, in terms of finance and sales and so on, their biggest concern is how China is selling more cheaper and manufacturing cheaper. That's the biggest, from what I can see, because I worked in both companies. I worked for Huawei, by the way, and I worked for U.S. telecom company. I work for both, and I can tell you they're really concerned about. No,
they are, but that's not that wasn't really the rationale behind the United Kingdom's decision to limit their access to government contracts. Listen, I think you've highlighted unintentionally how difficult Keir Starmer's job is, because all of the things that we might think are quite easily implemented, or here's a good idea, we can do that, are not easily implemented, and quite possibly are not very good ideas either. And I mean, you work for Huawei. So I don't need to lecture you on the what's the word that I want? The infiltration of public life in China that the government is perfectly entitled to undertake. So why would they have any more scruples when it came to the infiltration of private lives, and particularly public lives in Europe or in the United Kingdom? 0345 6060 973. And actually quite a few of you picking up on the fact that, actually, journalists probably are quite near the top of the list of communicators that a rogue state or an enemy state or a state engaging in espionage would be keen to access, although to support Ehab's point, they wouldn't hear much on mine except instructions from Mrs. O'Brien on what to bring home for dinner. It's 11:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:17. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The question of what impact it's going to have on you commercially, how it's going to affect your business, is one that I would like you to answer, but it may in fact be too soon. Some of you telling me you haven't quite worked through it anymore, but if you can, then there is definitely room for you today. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Should we do another Idiot's Corner? I said I wasn't going to, because I explained at the top of the show why anybody trying to pass this off as a Brexit benefit, including, I read, the shadow business secretary, is completely ignoring reality. But Matt's been in touch. Oh, look, James, we can undercut the whole of the EU now selling to the USA. I told you back in 2020 you would need to wait 10 years to understand Brexit is good. Are you starting to feel silly yet? Asks Matt. No, mate. And the way to stop feeling silly is to understand what's going on. That's why, despite your belligerent text message, deep down you still feel really, really silly. And I don't. Because everything that I said was going to happen is happening in the context of Brexit. In the context of Trump, nobody knows what's happening. And that's why I think the question of what do you think is going to happen next is one of the most interesting and difficult to answer. I think the tariffs, some of these tariffs, are going to come off almost as quickly as they've come on. It's the only way I can make sense of things. And even as I say that, my little alarm bell goes off saying you're trying to make sense of things that don't make sense. That lovely message the other day said, or caller the other day said, you're trying to make sense of nonsense. You're trying to make sense of nonsense. And that is where I feel a bit like the Economists today, trying to bring their training to the table when their training doesn't matter. Their training doesn't equip them to unravel this knot, this Gordian knot. I tried to make sense of nonsense, and with Brexit I did. But with this, I don't know that you can make sense of nonsense, except that very simplistic analysis, which doesn't mean it's wrong, that it is both a shakedown and a protection racket. It is designed solely and exclusively to deliver loyalty, pledges of loyalty, silencing of dissent, and the denuding of criticism, possibly as a precursor to seeking to become the latest elected leader who stays in power for as long as he wants, or who stays in power forever, doing a Putin, doing an Orban, possibly doing a Netanyahu. I don't know. But that's the only way you make sense of the nonsense. And if that is true, then the tariffs will come off almost as quickly as they have come in. I think we've got Andy back on the line in Chipping Camden. But remember, the questions I want answering are, what do you think happens next? And how is this likely to affect you? Hit those numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Andy, where were we?
Hi, James. Thanks again. It's basically what's going to happen next.
Yes.
I think that we've got to confront reality. Starmer is going to have to be strongly balanced in the fact that he can't go to Trump and publicly say, look, we had Brexit and it was a disaster. You're doing the same thing, in effect. Putin is in the background, I'm sure of it. But he needs to say it's a disaster, but he can't publicly say that and say, Donald, it was rubbish, you're being played, it's being influenced. And what's going to happen next is just total madness. It's going to be total chaos, total division for several years. And in the back of my mind, that's what Putin wants anyway, and I think that's what he funded with Brexit.
Certainly instability and chaos are pretty close cousins. We love the idea of you for the very simple reason that if you're sitting in Ukraine or indeed in Moscow and you're looking west, you're thinking, what the heck am I putting up with on a daily basis? And I could be having a bit of that. So you make that look as unstable and as unsafe as possible, and lo and behold, you've got Britain, the United Kingdom, becoming the first population in history to vote to impose economic sanctions on itself. I don't know. Hang on. I don't know if it works as much here. I think Trump, I don't know what's going on with Putin, whether Putin has something on him or whether, I think it's more that he wants to be like him than it is that he is frightened of. Well, it can be both, but he wants to be like him. He sees him as a playbook. He sees him as a guide rather than a threat.
Definitely. And I think they're happy because they're insulated by their money, by their riches, that they're happy to let it play out. They don't care about people's lives. We're going to go like cannon fodder, I think, but they don't care. There's no sense of responsibility.
And the one bit we have missed is the possibility or the inevitability, the absolute certainty of some people making a ton of money out of this, which we touched on a couple of weeks ago. The more money you've got, the more liquid assets, I think they're called, you've got, the more you can pile in as the markets collapse and share prices hit the floor, the more you can pile in on the companies that are almost guaranteed to recover. And as they recover, you make money. So what kind of people do you think might be thinking like that today? I don't know if you remember the picture of Nigel Farage he's very quiet at the moment, isn't he? I suppose we should be grateful for small mercies, pointing at the pictures of the pound tanking in the aftermath of Brexit with an even bigger cheesy grin on his face than usual. So what kind of characters might be making a ton of money out of the kind of moves in the financial market that are bad news, very bad news for everybody else? I'll leave you to speculate on that. Thank you, Andy. Lloyd's in Lewisham. Lloyd, what would you like to say?
Well, I'd like to say that what should happen next is that, regardless of whether tariffs are kept or not, is that the world, EU, maybe Canada and other countries, should stop using the American dollar as the global currency and use the euro or another currency. I would say the euro. And that is what the American power is built on. And it should happen regardless of what happens to tariffs, because we see now what could happen if you rely on one country and they decide to go in a different direction.
It makes you realise how much of the United States supremacy over the years has been down to, I mean, although it is, 50-odd different countries under one flag, it is in fiscal terms, in currency terms, it's one country, it's one entity, and that just gives it such extraordinary heft. Heft achieved historically by doing all the things that Donald Trump seems to despise, like spending tons of money in foreign wars, like spending tons of money in foreign countries, like having trade deficits with the rest of the world. So again, we find ourselves looking at him, hating the things that have delivered the power that he's now determined to wield in service of himself.
Power. We enable that power by using the US dollar as the global currency.
Yeah.
If you remember, when Iraq fell, the first thing that they did was move the currency back to the US dollar from the euro, which is how they were trading in the oil for a while. That's the first thing they did.
I didn't remember that, but it is obviously a huge, what would you call it?
And also, one other point on this, if you remember Mad Dog Gaddafi, as they used to call him, he, in one of his more lucid saner moments, he wanted to have a Pan-African currency built on the wealth of Africa to start dealing in their natural resources away from the US dollar. Shortly after that, he disappeared. I'm not really a conspiracy theorist.
No, you're not. You're making sense, and you're not the first person to raise this possibility. And I probably need to stop being a bit defensive about things I don't understand properly. So instead of saying, "Well, that sounds a bit difficult," or "That sounds a bit impossible," find someone who's qualified to unpick it even further. What is the likelihood of establishing an alternative reserve currency? How hard would it be? What kind of cooperation would be needed? The euro surely has given parts of the world a rather massive head start in that field. I can't, where would Canada slot into the equation? I can't see Asian countries wanting to necessarily swap one Western dominance for another Western dominance, but I don't know enough about it. I could be wrong. Speaking of being wrong, Jacob Rees-Mogg has chipped in. Extraordinary, really, people like him and Daniel Hannan, except not extraordinary. Our country is constructed to allow people who've been wrong about everything but wear the right tie and speak in the right way to waltz away unscathed by their epic wrongness. So Rees-Mogg has written, "Whisper it quietly, but possibly, just possibly, Trump could be about to give the biggest fillip in history to global trade. He does have a case that the US has been treated badly. It has run huge trade deficits as its consumers have sucked in products from around the world from countries that do not reciprocate. There is a chance that his aggressive approach may force other countries and trading blocs to remove their barriers, which would allow the world economy to flourish." I don't know how early you have to get up to start constructing intellectual's a bit ambitious, mental somersaults like that, but goodness me, it must be long before dawn. 27 minutes after 11 is the time. Billy's in Barcelona. Billy, what do you reckon?
I truly think, James, I think these tariffs are here to stay, and I think when they happen, I think we're headed for a recession.
They're almost contradictory points that you raise, aren't they? Almost.
What I struggle with is at the beginning of his administration, Trump talked about Mexico and Canada. Yeah. And he talked about how these tariffs were just going to be because they needed to close the border. And he got, in theory, symbolic wins within the first month. But then a month later, they're back.
Yeah.
And I just go back to the fact that countries included on this list, I mean, you look at Israel, a country that's promised to block all import barriers for the U.S. They now have 17% tariffs. You just look at this list, and even the calculations are based on net trade, not on actual tariffs that are being implemented on the U.S.
I mean, that's why some countries that are uninhabited or some territories that are uninhabited have been hit with 10%.
Right.
I mean, this is described in Salon magazine as a trade war with penguins, as he's placed 10% tariffs on uninhabited Antarctic islands. So, yeah, I don't think anyone gets punished for suggesting that this isn't the most sophisticated piece of economic calculation we've ever seen. But where do you derive your, I don't think confidence is quite the right word, your opinion that he's not going to start lifting them in return for unspecified favors?
Because I just haven't seen it with Mexico and Canada, and maybe you're right. If they're personal favors to him, maybe that calculus changes in his mind. But I keep going back to something that Elon Musk said during the election season that's really stuck with me, where he talked about temporary hardship for ordinary Americans giving way to something better.
Yeah.
That's something that's just terrified me when you think about guys like Mark Andreessen and Peter Thiel, the way they've talked about how this current liberal order around the world needs to transform into something new. I mean, I hate to say anything's planned or coerced, but that's just what's been ringing in my head.
I'm not surprised. Short-term pain for long-term gain, and yet the long-term gain would not be for the massive majority of your fellow Americans. You should have a look at what the Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy has been suggesting this morning, because it gives, I don't know if it's hope, but it provides it's not hope, actually. It's bleaker than your analysis, because it makes a pretty strong case for saying it is essentially a shakedown. It is essentially an invitation to industry in a way that he can't clamp down on them like he can clamp down on judges and journalists and educators. So instead, he clamps down on them by making their life much, much harder, and then says, well, nice business you got there. Be a shame if something has already happened to it. I can take it away if you do what I want. Now, that might be pretend that you believe my economic policies are brilliant, make enormous donations to my political funds. Whatever it might be, I would bet you $1 that he does start lifting them sooner rather than later on companies that have danced really, really, really to his tune.
You may be right. And I don't know if you read the story. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but it was a Chinese billionaire that made a 7-figure investment in Trump's coin and got his charges dropped.
Yes.
By U.S. attorneys.
Yes, I do remember that.
And I think you're right. When you look at the global stage or in the industrial, it's, he's run for 2 reasons. I think 1 is to enrich himself, and 2 is because he loves playing the game.
And 3 is to stay out of jail.
Stay out of jail, yeah.
Which brings us back to Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Hungary this morning, where Viktor Orban has become the first leader to effectively remove his country from the influence and auspices of international law, which is, of course, the only international law there is. There isn't an alternative international law. There is either the law or there is no law. And Orban and Netanyahu today putting the first bricks on the wall of no law. How many other people join in remains to be seen. Billy, thank you. A long way from home. 11:31 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:34. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm trying to find, quite a few of you are telling me that the Falkland Islands have been hit with a 42% tariff. I haven't actually personally been able to confirm that yet. I'm not going to lie to you, I haven't tried very hard, but I've now had so many messages pointing it out to me that I'm beginning to think I should have done. Which film is cited most often on this programme? Go on, it's not a trick question. Which cinematic masterpiece? That's a subjective, but I think a sound opinion. Which film do you think is cited most often, or even quoted in on this radio programme, apart from Field of Dreams, apart from the Ray Liotta slightly rewritten, slightly edited quote that Ray Liotta, the late great Ray Liotta, kindly provided for us in the context of Mystery Hour. Well, no, in the context of Ray Liotta awards, which are not confined exclusively to Mystery Hour, that can be given to anybody who is unfeasibly qualified to contribute to whatever the conversation we're currently having is. So, what film? Yes, Raj has got it right. With apologies for the spelling. It's not The Godfather, no, but it could have been, and it's not Field of Dreams. You're not allowed. I don't think I do any Godfather references, do I? So I don't know. No, nice business you got there. Shame if something's going to happen to it. So maybe today that would win. I haven't referenced this, but over the years, it's not 1984, you peasant. That's a book, not a film. I know it's a film, but I wouldn't. Good Lord, that's a novel. I'd say most people. It's definitely not Forrest Gump. Shrek, actually, for a while, there was the Lord Farquhar quote, wasn't there? Some of you are going to die. But that is a risk I am, or words to that effect. Most of you have got it. And the answer is, of course, Ferris Bueller, which makes today a very special day because there is a clip from Ferris Bueller's Day Off that seems to fit quite well with the general mood of the moment. I guess a man that has been ambushed by the word groceries in recent weeks or months is probably not going to be all over the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act or the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, depending on which version you prefer. And if you're just joining me and you don't know what I'm talking about when I talk about a man being ambushed by groceries, well, we live to serve.
But likewise, an old-fashioned term that we use, groceries. I used it on the campaign. It's such an old-fashioned term, but a beautiful term, groceries. It sort of says a bag with different things in it. Groceries went through the roof. And I campaigned on that. I talked about the word groceries for a lot.
You sort of think sometimes, should we stop marvelling at because it's so not? No, you can't stop marvelling. This man's in charge. And, I mean, you wouldn't let him run a bath, would you, if you had your brain screwed on even half tightly? But here we are, wondering what's going to happen next and what on earth Keir Starmer could or should be doing about it. Carl is in Leicester. Carl, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Carl.
I think Keir Starmer's a bit of a cool head. I think he would probably surveyed all his different options. I think Trump needs to be aware that we've gone through Brexit. We made that decision. We've seen how that's panned out with tariffs, trying to export, trying to get stuff across the channel to us.
Barriers rather than tariffs, but the effect is the same. Sorry to be
exactly. It's not, where it would be kind of cost effective to
making it harder and more expensive to trade with your nearest.
Yes, exactly. And I think we've got experiences of that, and I think the government is kind of knows. I think maybe where the other options are within the global market, etc. And I think that Trump needs to kind of internalise things and look at what have they got in industry. I mean, they've got a lot of rust belts. They've got a lot of industry. I'm sure that the Industrial Revolution, very much like the UK, has been stifled. He's obviously looking for people to internalise things and look to buy American cars, American white goods, etc., etc. But I just wonder how strong they are because,
do you think it's time, Carl? I'll let you produce tomorrow's programme if you want. Is it time to ask how easy it would be to buy British? So we'll just make a list of things that we might, or buy European. We'll make a list of things that we might be looking to purchase soon and then try to work out and give some free advertising to some companies that might need it. How easy it actually would be to, quotes, buy British, end quotes.
Well, buy British. I mean, I think industry has gone from this country. I used to be in the construction industry and have been in it kind of over 30 odd years. And when they were talking about building, apprenticeships and engineering, it's gone. And I think even then people were saying, get a good education. Raggy Omar was saying about education and us being a transient race because we could go anywhere in the world with the skill set that we had.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of an honest approach to the way industry is in this country. There'll always be niche markets where you can produce low volume at high prices and people will pay for it. But, the industry that I'm in, we kind of look at China and we look at Poland, certainly for manufacturing because of the efficiency and the costs.
Harder to go to Poland than it would have been once. And of course, security concerns. It's one of those areas where Ian Duncan Smith finds himself in the unfamiliar position of being right about things. The security concerns about doing more with China are probably not taken seriously enough by some people in the British political establishment. So if we can't buy British, we could simply try harder not to buy American. But that is going to be incredibly difficult as well. And I like it. Thank you, Carl. I like it as a question. It might seem a bit daft. Go up to your mum's attic and get out all your old Buy British merchandise. But I think it personalises the political. I think that if we were thinking about, it's not the same challenge or the same problem, but it's on the same page, or it's at least in the same book. If we're trying to understand the challenges that Keir Starmer faces, trying to either pursue an entirely new course from a standing start, or try to simultaneously establish a possible new course while retaining proximity to the old one or staying in part on the old one. That's what he has to do on a political level. On a personal level, how easy would it be for us to wean ourselves from dependency upon American imports? I genuinely don't know the answer to that, but I think it's helpful to see a personal challenge in the context of contemplating a national one or a political one. 11:42 is the time. I'm getting texts about people who are going to be personally affected by it, but as with Brexit, and the parallels are pretty clear, aren't they? This is a nice one from Noel. How you in Britain feel now watching America is how we in Ireland felt watching you going through your Brexit nonsense. You call it nonsense, Noel. There are people out there today claiming that this is some sort of vindication of the economic sanctions that we imposed upon ourselves a few years ago. Utterly unnecessarily and from within rather than without. But plus ça change. Robert's in Edgware. Robert, what would you like to say?
I think all of the countries affected by Trump's tariffs.
That's all the countries. All the countries. Every country.
Okay, well that's everyone then. we should form a second consortium and deal amongst ourselves, essentially buying from each other.
You mean a single market? You mean a single market?
I mean a single market, excepting for America.
Yeah.
That.
Well, in terms of what the UK should do, I suppose most obviously, and it's not an option, sadly, certainly not yet or for the foreseeable, is rejoining the single market that we left a few years ago. That would help.
Yes, but I'm thinking of other places too, Canada, the rest of America, apart from the United States, Africa, Australasia, etc., in order to counter what Trump is doing, which is essentially he's introducing trade.
But doesn't that become a world without trade agreements?
No, there is a trade agreement.
Just between everyone except the states, though.
Yes.
Yes. Crikey! I mean, if that were feasible. No, let me rephrase that. I have no idea how feasible that is, but it would make a bit of a mockery of the existence of the World Trade Organization and sundry other traditions and historical events, wouldn't it, if it were that easy to do? But maybe you're going to say to me, well, the facts have changed, so we need to change our minds.
Yes, the facts have changed, and we need to change in response to the facts. As for it being feasible, you'd instruct a computer programmer, not Fujitsu, but a reliable computer programmer to ensure that nobody is left out. So that, for example, I was talking to your research or whatever, if Canada is selling timber to Europe and then Europe sells something else to Africa, the main point is that nobody profits at the expense of any other.
No, well, I mean that is a wonderful vision that you describe, and neither of us clear on how feasible it is. But I know that trade negotiations take years, if not decades, in normal circumstances. And although these circumstances feel profoundly abnormal, I don't know that they're as abnormal as all that. I mean, it's happened, I think, twice before. We just heard about Smoot-Hawley in the context of the United States. I think they tried it in 1828 as well, although I haven't got the history. I've told you before, my A-level was about Charlemagne and the Byzantine Empire. I didn't learn anything useful at all. But something happened in 1828. My next guest might know the answer to this, involving the introduction of mass tariffs, and that didn't go well either. I don't know whether it went better or worse than the Hawley-Smoot attempts of 1930 that our Ferris Bueller clip just reminded us of. But hey, third time lucky, maybe? How much would you bet on that?
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:49 is the time. I've been joined in the studio by an American journalist and author with whom you may be familiar. If you're not, you can thank me later. Ta-Nehisi Coates is the author of a new book, The Message, which, well, I mean, it seeks to cut to the heart of nationalist myths, I suppose, in shorthand. But I'm struck, as I sit down with you, by the way that real life events have moved so quickly since you delivered your manuscript that I presume you're halfway through your next one already.
No, I needed to take a brief pause after the first one, but no, I think you're exactly right about that. We never know what is actually going to happen. I wrote this before Trump won. I wrote this before Joe Biden dropped out. I wrote this before October 7th, or I guess I took my trip before October 7th. And so books take a long time. I didn't realize how, events were going to move, obviously.
And you mentioned the trip. There's three central targets.
Yeah.
Just explain to my listeners what unites them.
So I think it's a search for a story on my own behalf. I actually think it's a very, very personal, mission that hopefully opens up into something a little bit more than navel gazing. So the first chapter is a trip to Senegal, which was my first trip to Africa as an African American, which was very, very important because we as African Americans are always in search of our past, what our history are. We are pretty unique in the sense that we don't have direct connects, legible direct connects to countries, like Irish Americans, Italian Americans, et cetera. And so we're always kind of in search of that. So the first one was grappling with that. The second one was a trip to South Carolina where I got to see a hearing at a school board where they, God, I'm stumbling trying to say this. They were trying to ban my book.
What year was that?
That was 2023.
So, as I say, the speed with which events...
Yeah. Now they're banning...
Why did they want to ban your book, Ta-Nehisi? Do you know?
Yeah, I do know. I think because it was being used in the schools, and books, unlike any other technology of media, they forge a one-to-one connection between the reader and the author. And that's a space that parents can't get into. And so if you're the kind of parent that very much wants your child, to have, exactly your beliefs, books pose an obvious problem.
That's so clear when you explain it like that, because it does remove a kind of parental dictatorship.
Yeah, it's not like you can watch books with your kids together. I mean, you can read them, but you don't know what the kid is taking out of it, It's a different thing.
What happened on that one? What happened when you got there?
They didn't ban the book. In fact, there was a strong movement to allow the kids to read the book, on the contrary, which was very surprising to me. But, it was quite beautiful to see.
And the third trip, which was possibly, I think it was, as you've written, it was prompted by a piece you wrote for The Atlantic in 2014.
Yeah, I'd written a piece in Atlantic in 2014, which is probably, a piece that did the most for my own public profile back in the States, arguing for reparations on behalf of enslaved African Americans or descendants of enslaved African Americans. And a piece of that was a demonstration of where reparations had worked. And the one I used was reparations to the state of Israel, which I differentiate from reparations for survivors of the Holocaust, specifically to the state of Israel. And that was not received well among certain quarters in the States.
Because it excluded the Palestinian people?
No, I think because it neglected to ask the moral question of what was done, with those. What did the state actually then do? I think when I wrote that piece, it wasn't just an argument for reparations on the basis of cash. There was a moral argument behind it, that this is a part of advancing the world. And that piece of the argument, it just didn't work. And so to remedy that and better understand that, I didn't want to kind of sit at home and, write an apology letter. I wanted to go see for myself, which I did.
In a sense, it's about what we think we know. It's all about what we think we know about the world and how it informs our views. And crucially, that what we think we know is often not true, often not correct.
Yeah, and I think it's also about the extent to which a news media which prides itself in the States as being independent from national interests is in fact often not. And that became really, really clear to me.
Consciously and subconsciously.
Consciously and subconsciously. But I think some people really think they're doing, like they really are independent.
Yeah.
But it was quite clear to me that they were not when I was over there. And to make that very, very specific, what I mean is what I saw in terms of Israeli policy towards Palestinians had a kind of vividness, a kind of clarity, and just a kind of tactility, if that's a word, touchability.
It is now.
It is now. That I just was really unfamiliar, with in mainstream American press.
And when you think about the amount of column inches that is dedicated to the Middle East and to Israel and Gaza in particular, it is triply extraordinary that you were so taken aback by what you actually discovered on the ground.
And I would add in who the journalists are that get to fill those column inches.
Yeah.
I am not at this moment, or I certainly was not when I went, familiar with Palestinian journalists or Palestinian Americans that held prominent places at the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic, where I used to work. I mean, that was not like these mainstream publications, MSNBC, the networks. Palestinians themselves do not have the opportunity in America to tell their story. And I think we all suffer for that.
And in many ways, this creates the context in which the current atrocities can happen, because not only do we not hear about them properly, but also what would you call it? The counterattack is in place sometimes before the truth has even landed. So you will be attacked, if you haven't been already, for failing to mention various other things when you're trying to provide an analysis of something completely different. You're trying to describe the Palestinian experience. But why haven't you mentioned this? And why haven't you mentioned that? And why haven't you mentioned the other? A word on why you had to prove the religious background of your own grandparents before you could get into one.
Oh, yeah. I went to the city of Hebron. I couldn't walk down the street. It was very simple. If I was Palestinian, I wouldn't be able to walk down the street at all. And Hebron is a holy city in the West Bank where both Palestinians live and Jewish Israeli settlers live. Jewish Israeli settlers pretty much enjoy the run of most of the streets, and Palestinians do not. And this is very explicit. This is not, implicit or anything. Literally, there are armed guards standing there dictating who can walk down the street. And I was only allowed when it became clear, even as an American, that I was not Muslim.
You had to go. Because if you had done any of this from perspective, then all of the attempts to shut you down or tell you were wrong would carry more weight than they do when you turn around and say, hang on a minute, I was there.
They would, but I wouldn't have been convinced myself.
Right.
Like, I think that's a bit like in my bones. Like, I have to believe what I'm saying. You know what I mean? And then, whatever comes in is whatever comes in. But I can't have any doubt myself. I can have questioning, but in terms of the moral case that I make, when I say that somebody's practicing apartheid, when I say that this is segregation, when I say it's a Jim Crow, I really should have seen it. And I did.
And you can point at it.
And I can, yes.
And you can cite it. To end where we began, Netanyahu's landed in Hungary today, and Orban has announced that they're removing themselves from the International Criminal Court. Donald Trump has declared war on the world, I think, overnight. Yeah. I mean, were you in the air when this happened, or have you been in town for a few days? It's almost as if you daren't sleep in case what's going to happen.
I think one of the sad things that is happening is we had in this world one of the great crimes against humanity ever committed, and we should have learned something from that. We should have learned something from the industrialized genocide. And I fear what we have learned increasingly, or what is happening right now, and I hope this is not ultimately the case. The legacy of that is being folded into an argument for more oppression. And that is devastating and scary and very upsetting to me.
The message is a book about stories.
Yes.
And also a book about truth.
Yes.
And how often they are not occupying the same space.
Yes, it is. And I would go back to something that you said earlier about what happens when certain people don't get to tell their stories and how that affects things. And one of the ways that is most explicit, we depend on stories, media, news, movies, TV, etc., to tell us who is human and who is not. That's one of the basic uses of it, to define humanity for itself. And when you don't see people as human, as you said, then the atrocities become much easier because they aren't legible human beings to you. They're just numbers, you know what I mean? Who maybe deserved what, they got.
That is what the idea they're trying to create in the minds of the people that go along with it.
Yes.
As I've mentioned a couple of times, there's so much going on in the world at the moment. But on a personal level, are you worried? I mean, the book they tried to ban was part of the backlash against BLM, really, wasn't it? And the attack upon diversity, equity and inclusion is now gone nuclear. It's now weapons grade. You must have a fairly big target on your own back. I never thought I'd ask an American this, but do you feel safe in the States at the moment?
No, but that's okay. I mean, the people who I count as my tradition and my ancestry as writers and as journalists never felt safe. Frederick Douglass had to flee from America, actually, to come over here because he had a target on his back. Ida B. Wells, all of my heroes. That's not a particularly new thing. I don't like it. I don't love it. I'm not a fan of it. But I tell you what I fear more than any target on my back. I fear the leaders of American institutions, of journalistic institutions, law schools, business, universities, who are bowing and who have revealed themselves to be utter cowards. I fear them. I fear their cowardice more than I fear anything.
Because if the journalists, the educators and the judges aren't fighting, what's left?
What is left? If the people whose very job it is, who have defined themselves as upholders of America's institution, who believe in American myths and stories, maybe even more than I do, you know what I mean? And they won't fight. That's really how it happens. That's really how it happens. That's what I fear.
Ta-Nehisi Coates, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
The message is out now, published by Hamish Hamilton. The time is 12 noon, and somewhat improbably, it's Mystery Hour next.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 12 is the time. Buy that book, or borrow it from the library. The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I'll spell it for you as well. T-A-N-E-H-I-S-I, Coates. It is, as you heard, and I had no idea that was going to happen at the end of that interview, that we were going to come back to where we began the show, talking about the danger of what happens when the judges, the journalists and the educators are all bending the knee to the wannabe dictator, and then businesses join in as well. What is left? Going to be slightly haunted by that encounter, but the book will give you power. 4 minutes after 12 is the time. Speaking about power, knowledge is power, and you never get more knowledge on this programme than on Thursdays from 12, because it is Mystery Hour. Talk about light and shade. Talk about moving from one of the great thinkers of our time to our weekly potterings in the shallower end of our time together. You know how it works. If you don't, I'll fill you in shortly. Someone rings in with a question, possibly you. Someone else rings in with an answer, possibly you. The number that you need, whether it's you or you, is 03456060973. My favourite contributor of the week wins a Mystery Hour board game, which you can find out more about at mysteryhour.co.uk, and you can get the full terms and conditions for that proper competition at lbc.co.uk. Because I had a guest in that final quarter, it means, well, it usually means things move a little bit slowly in the first 5 minutes. I mean, there are currently 3 phone lines free, but it's already 12:05. So by the time I finish saying this, and with the lag that is built into the broadcast in case you ring me up and swear, it's possible that all the phone lines will be full by the time you hear this. But anyway, that shouldn't stop you from judicious use of redial if you struggle to get through. A normal time or a Mystery Hour time, always the judicious use of redial is your best chance of grabbing one of those phone lines as its previous incumbent vacates. Should we just crack on? I think we should, shouldn't we? I'm in the mood for this today. I'm not sure. Well, I'm always in the mood for Mystery Hour, but some weeks it feels more welcome even than others. Let us begin in Canary Wharf. Perry is there. Perry, question or answer?
Hi, good afternoon, James. Good afternoon, James.
Hello,
I've
Perry.
got a question.
Carry on.
Okay, just come back from holiday in Tenerife. Oh, it was very warm.
Was it? Was it nice? Even at this time, where are we? April, March. Okay, carry on.
Yeah, it was. I mean, essentially the temperature's 21, but the sun is so hot high up in the horizon that you really need suntan lotion all the time. And my question is about the efficacy of suntan lotion. I was using Sun Factor 30.
Right.
And on the bottle it says reapply every 1 to 2 hours. So my question is, no doubt when you put it on you get a protection of 30 times, but after an hour, after 2 hours, does that gradually go down to zero? Let's say after half an hour, am I now protected by 20 rather than 30?
Or does it go from 0 to 0? Does it go from 30 to 0 in a heartbeat?
Instantly, exactly.
Did you talk to anyone else on holiday about this?
Well, the reason I'm asking, funny enough, yes, we started talking about this on holiday because
I love it.
Because
yes.
And I didn't realise this. I started to burn, despite putting on a lot of suntan lotion. The reason for this is we had a freshwater, slightly salty water swimming pool, and swimming in there, it acts like paint stripper to the suntan lotion. I didn't realise after 3 or 4 days that was the case. And okay, you've got to be really careful when you come out and you put it back on. So you've got another factor there about water.
See what you did there.
There you go.
So how? I mean, really, how does it work? Does it decline gradually? I mean, is it a marketing ploy? Do you need to top it up that much at all, or are they just going to sell more? The more we top it up, the more they sell, right?
Yeah,
that
could last all day for you all you know.
Yes, it could. And does it diminish? So if you put on SPF 30, will it a little bit later on that day becoming SPF 20 and then SPF 10? I like this question. It may be that the answer makes a mockery of the question. We may have slightly misunderstood the science in the first place, but there's only one way to find out, Perry.
Yeah, let's debust this, James. What does the graph look like?
What does the graph look like, if indeed the graph exists? Thank you, Perry. 03456060973 is the number that you need. Peter is in Gerrard's Cross. Peter, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on, Peter.
So me and my wife moved into a new house on Saturday.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's been quite stressful, but
sure
loving it. So I went into the downstairs toilet.
Steady.
I was stood up looking at the toilet, doing what I was doing.
Right.
And to the left is an exposed pipe. And on that pipe is an inline water filter, and it's called UK water filters. And I thought to myself, I need to either box this in or do something, because it's really ugly. And that's as most as I thought about it.
Yeah.
I didn't say anything to my wife. I didn't get my phone out my pocket. I didn't speak about it to anybody.
Yeah.
But the next morning, scrolling through social media, there's an advertisement for this UK water filter. And I can understand it if I'd mentioned it to somebody, or if I'd had my phone out taking pictures or something, but I didn't speak about it. I didn't search it, look it up. It was from the minute I entered the room, I saw it, thought about it for 15 seconds, left the room, didn't even mention it to my wife because she'd find it boring.
Surely not, but you thought you'd ring me.
I thought I'd ring you, yeah.
I mean, there are two possible answers to this question. And oddly, it's something I've been looking into a bit lately. The first is it is just a complete coincidence.
I'd never heard of the company before either, though.
No, it doesn't. I mean, there's loads of companies that you encounter for the first time on social media that you've never heard of before. It's just that this was in your mind, so you notice it because of recency syndrome or whatever it's called. Do you see what I mean? But the other one is that your phone does know that you've just moved house.
Okay.
And so your algorithm may be serving up things that have been proven to be popular with people that have recently moved house. I read an article about this. It was about journalists actually sitting down in conference one morning, and I think the phones know that they're near other phones, so that the algorithm then makes suggestions based on almost a sort of demographic it's established that you're in by some of your search history and the other users that you're near to. Here's someone that might be interested in trampolines because they're of the right age, and so your algorithm fills with trampolines when you've looked for trampolines. But if you've never looked for a trampoline, why would trampolines pop up in your algorithm? Answer: because of your age, because of your shopping habits, and because of the proximity to other people. So if it is known that they have children, then it will come up in yours as well. So it could be recency bias. There is a third option I've just thought of. It could be recency bias. It could be that your wife wouldn't have Googled it, would she? Because you hadn't had any conversation with her at all.
No, she wouldn't have ever even bothered.
It could be a complete coincidence. It could be that they realise you have recently moved house, and water filters are one of the things people who've recently moved house are most likely to look for. Or you could have been talking in your sleep.
Well, I do that and fall out of bed a lot in my sleep. But,
I'm going to leave it on the board because I've only just sort of done my thinking out loud.
I did wonder a fourth option, if maybe the previous owners had also ordered one of these filters and my phone knows that I am there where somebody has delivered this item before.
Yeah, I'd probably file that under option 2, but we'll call that option 4, is that the previous owners had Googled it and
had one delivered, or this one delivered that I'm looking at.
Yeah. So is it? So really, it's a complete coincidence or something else? And if it's something else, can someone tell us what it is?
That's correct. Yeah.
I like it a lot. Have you got everything unpacked yet?
Nope, doing decorating at the minute. Major overhaul is needed.
Well, good luck with it. Good luck. So friends of mine just moved house, and they've got to give, if they don't give the boxes back to the movers, they start getting charged £4.50 a day per box. That puts your skates on, Peter. I can tell you that gets things unpacked at a rate of knots.
Do all ourselves and just sort of hired a bit of a man with a van team. So
good for you. Good for you. It is 12:13. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and Lucy is in Greenwich. Lucy, question or answer?
Hi, question. I got some roses.
That's not going to work, is it? I don't know what happened there. It sounds like you fell down a well. We'll try and improve the quality of your phone line. I shall hop to Southampton, where James is waiting. James, question or answer?
Question, James.
Carry on.
So, following on from talking in sleep on the last call, it's a different habit in sleep to do with how we stop learning to roll out of our bed.
Well, he said he didn't. He said he hadn't learnt to do that. He fell out of bed a lot still. But that's quite weird, given that the question was about how the things know about things that we don't know about, they know about things. And then you phoned in with a question that is intrinsically linked to the question that was being asked on this programme and via phones shortly before you came on.
Weird.
Isn't it? Do you know what's even weirder?
Go on.
When I opened the programme talking about cutting onions, and one listener, I think he was called James, was actually cutting onions at the time.
Oh, well.
It's not that weird.
I have sometimes rung mystery out from the kitchen making lunch. It may have been me, I don't know.
Go on then, what's the question? How do we do it?
Yeah. So basically, I've got a 4-year-old daughter, and we recently went on holiday, and she had her own big proper single bed for the first time ever. No bed guards or anything to stop from falling out. So what I did is I pushed the 2 single beds together in the fear that she may roll out in the night. But I went back in there to check on her later in the evening. She was still plonked fat in the middle of the bed. But obviously when she was a toddler, we had the full rails on and everything protecting. And if I forgot to put the rail on, lo and behold, she would fall out of the bed.
How do we do it? How do we learn not to do it? I mean, it's probably trial and error, isn't it? But it would be subconscious because you're asleep at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I've not done any training. All we've left is a rail on the bed that came with her first ever proper bed that prevented her from getting out of the bed. And I was just like, how on earth is there more to it subconsciously? Is it something you just train yourself to do when you don't know about it? It just baffled me as to how she. I was certain she was going to roll out of this hotel bed.
It's not beyond possibility that we do things subconsciously while we're asleep. So there is that thing, that thing you get when you're having a dream that you've fallen over and you jolt yourself awake.
Oh yeah, regular occurrence.
If you have a variation on that experience and you learn to recognise it, and you know that if you don't wake up and roll back, or just roll back without waking up, then you're going to fall out of bed and land on your on your
Well,
bones.
yeah, possibly.
But we need to know. You're not accepting that.
No, I just needed to wake up in the night and go to the toilet. That's next.
Yes, that sounds like quite a milestone. 12:16 is the time. Sun cream, phones, coins. Oh, no, we didn't do the coins. I think that's coming up a bit later. And beds. It's 12:16.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:17. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So I think Jonathan Ashworth, the business secretary, has given a speech in the Commons about the so-called reciprocal tariffs, and Keir Starmer is launching Labour's local election campaign today, so expect both of those stories to be popping up later with Sheila and Tom. We concern ourselves with weightier matters for the time being. Mystery Hour with us until 1. Questions still in need of answers, I reminded you of shortly before the break, so we will crack on. Lucy is in Greenwich. Lucy, question or answer?
Question, James. It's about flowers and how you keep them alive once you've cut them and put them in a vase.
Yes.
Someone said to me, put some money in, some 1 and 2p's.
Coppers.
I got some roses in round Valentine's, very nice roses. I put the food in them. I put 1 and a 2p in them, and you wouldn't believe they're still alive, James.
Still looking nice. I don't know whether
Still looking good after nearly 2 months,
Yeah,
which is unreal for roses, because they're usually the first things to die in a vase.
Are they definitely real?
They're definitely real, and they came from that supermarket you're always advertising.
What, Morrison's?
No, not that one. The M&S.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean actually advertising rather than me just mentioning?
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry, that's an important distinction.
Station in general.
Yeah, it's an important distinction
good
to make.
quality. Quality.
No, very much so. I got mum flowers from M&S. I got them delivered on Mother's Day this year, not Valentine's Day. That would be weird.
Yeah.
So why? I mean, it could be an old wives' tale, but...
Well, the thing is, we found out last week that coppers are made out of steel and not copper, one and 2Ps.
Yeah.
And so what is in steel that would keep my roses alive all the time?
Or a little bit of air and... yeah, go on then. It's on the board. It's going to have something to do... If it's true, which may not be definitely true, it may just be lucky, then it's going to have something to do with stopping the flowers from degrading, which means you need to know how they degrade, which is probably bacteria. So there might be a relationship between the metal and the bacteria, but I don't know. It's on the board for you. All right.
Thank you very much, James.
No, thank you very much. Sun cream, phones, coins, and beds. Ian's in Farnham. Ian, question or answer?
Yeah, question, please, James.
Yeah, carry on, Ian. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be on a holiday, and I was sitting on the patio, and I was watching this army event, and it was about a 4-metre span, and there were 2 holes, and they'd be walking along in 2 lines, going into one, coming out of the other, etc. But occasionally they'd stop, they'd have a little huddle.
Yeah.
And then they'd continue in their lines. But then occasionally what they'd do is they'd stop and they'd send out some reconnaissance ants to have a look at something. I'm not sure what.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe you can help me formulate the question, but my question really was, what are they saying when they stop and communicate, or why are they sending out reconnaissance to...
well, you've answered the second one. They're doing reconnaissance.
Right. Yeah, okay, but for what?
Predators?
I don't know.
I don't know either. So you think they're in columns?
Yes, yeah.
Between
really
holes.
straight columns.
Really straight.
Between holes.
We've seen that. And then they stop and they huddle. So not all of them or just a few of them?
Not all of them.
Right.
So
the leaders.
There's kind of 2 straight lines, and then they form 2 or 3 little huddles, and then they send some reconnaissance out for something.
And then they carry on their way.
On. Yeah, they do. But
Well, it's going to be food or predators or food,
Yeah.
isn't it? I imagine.
I would imagine so, but it didn't seem that they were carrying anything, or they were taking anything back. They were just having a huddle, having a bit of a vibe,
a bit of a conflab.
That's it. Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's
you
there.
can help me.
Well, I don't know. I mean, we'll find out. What do we need? An entomologist.
Well, probably an antologist.
Ant-Man.
Maybe.
Paul Rudd.
Maybe.
All right, it's on the board. Thank you, Ian. And speaking of getting people's names wrong, the business secretary is, of course, Jonathan Reynolds, not Jonathan Ashworth, who I don't think is currently an MP. So my apologies for no one noticed that mistake. I don't know why I correct mistakes that no one noticed. It's because I'm a perfectionist. It's a curse. But someone's got to do it. 12:22 is the time. Couple of phone lines free. 5 questions in need of answers. Room for more. David's in Flor in Northamptonshire. David, question or answer?
It's a question, please, James.
Carry on, David.
James, I've just picked my son up from university. We're big fans of Mystery Hour.
Oh,
and
lovely. You're driving him home?
Yes, we've just pulled over, but yes, driving him home.
Oh, that's lovely.
My question is, I'm a big fan of a crime drama, and when watching a fictional drama on television, you can catch yourself thinking about the fact that obviously it's been filmed, there's a camera crew, a director, and then within a couple of seconds you've forgotten that and you're back into the story. And my question is, what's going on within our brains that we're able to switch off just like that?
Crikey, I mean, it's suspension of disbelief, isn't it?
I'm not sure. I often wonder if I was an actor and I was watching it, I would probably be a bit more aware of what was going on around it.
Yeah, maybe. So you're sort of wondering why you can forget that it's not real.
Yes, yeah, and you're back into the story and you're looking at it as you would.
I mean, part of the answer is because it's good. And if you were watching, seriously, I've seen productions where you would never forget that it's not real because the actors aren't very good. So it's got something to do.
Yeah, I suppose so.
with the quality of the acting, isn't it? Yeah. Psychological explanation. Well, I'm going to put it on the board.
Thank you.
But I don't want you to get your hopes up too high, because I can't currently see what the answer would look like or sound like. Can you? You mean like a psychological phenomenon?
No, absolutely. But there might be somebody clever enough out there to be able to.
There might be. What's your boy's name?
Toby.
Well, give my best to Toby. Has he had a good term?
Yeah, he has, yes.
Is that the end of the year now? Has he broken up for the summer?
Well, he has. He's got a couple of online assignments to do, but he is broken up, so he doesn't go back till September. So he's living alive.
That's all right, isn't it? Has he cleared his room out? I thought you were going to turn it into a gym. 24, safe journey home for both of you, David and Toby. So, does sun cream have a graph? In other words, I slap on 30 SPF at 12 noon. What protection have I got at 1 p.m? 0345, not specifically that, but generally, does it have a declining efficacy? And if not, what the heck is going on? 0345 606 0973. Peter bought a new house, and there's a water filter. And he saw it, and he thought to himself, there's a water filter. And then the next thing he knew, he's on social media, and it's full of adverts for water filters. What's happened there then? If you put copper coins in a vase of roses or any other cut flowers, do they look nice for longer? And if they do, why? How do we learn to stop ourselves falling out of bed while we're asleep, rolling out of bed? And this is a childhood question. It's not about alcohol. How do ants communicate? And what is happening when we are watching a drama and we forget that it's actors and think instead, for most of the time that we're watching, because if you didn't think it was real, you wouldn't watch it, would you? If you knew it wasn't real. Do you remember what I mean? I've got Brian Conley coming up soon on Full Disclosure, and it's about the second time since I met him. I only met him this week. It's the second time on the show where I've thought, it's a puppet. A key moment, that. I don't know whether you know why, but when you hear Brian telling, he's such a lovely man, and you hear him telling the story of his own extraordinary career. He's done so much. It's ridiculous, frankly. But for him, at least, that was a really crucial moment in his career when "it's a puppet" became a sort of national catchphrase. Steve is in Barnsley. Steve, question or answer?
Hi there, James. It's a question, please.
Carry on, Steve.
A bit of a backstory. I'll make it very quick. About 2 weeks ago, I come home from work early and I was listening to this while I was making a cup of tea.
Right.
And the particular tea bags that we use, I don't know if I can mention the name.
Oh, hang on. Let me just consult with the lawyers. Tea bags. Yeah, no, well, that's fine. Yeah, what tea bags were they?
It's Yorkshire tea bags.
Oh, no, you can't say that. No, you can't say Yorkshire tea bags. PG tips, I'd have been fine. You only get... No, carry on. So, yeah, Yorkshire tea. That's okay.
So, we've not been up here long, so when in Rome and all that, we started drinking Yorkshire tea bags. Now, Yorkshire tea bags, they attach 2 tea bags together.
Yeah.
Now, I was making my tea, and obviously I only wanted the 1 tea bag, so I pulled it apart, split the tea bag that I was originally going to put in my cup.
Yeah.
So annoyed, it was about 12:45. I tried to ring you to ask you why they're putting these 2 tea bags together, and I couldn't get through, and I've been holding on to this for 2 weeks.
Well,
essentially, why do Yorkshire tea make 2 tea bags attached together?
How many cups of tea have you had since?
Oh, I'm a regular tea drinker.
And how many other times has that happened?
It's not a me thing, it's a tea bag thing.
No, how many times has it happened? None.
Occasionally.
No, it hasn't happened since, though, has it?
No, if I'm honest.
Happened on that one occasion. So I think the answer is really obvious. And I'm due a round of applause because it's nearly 12:30. Do you know the story about the bloke who marched into a match factory and offered to make them a fortune?
I distinctly remember you. I think you've mentioned it in the past. I honestly don't know the details.
I'll tell you what, mate. The day I do a show without mentioning something that I've mentioned in the past is the day we can all hang up our headphones and go home. So he walks into a match factory.
I tell my friends about when your dad was buying toys.
Yeah, that will be it with the Birmingham accident. Getting a good toy department over to the toy department, please. So he marches into a match factory. And he says, I can make you a fortune. And they say, go on then. And then they sign various documents, which means if he truly does tell them something that makes them a lot of money, he gets a slice of it. And he tells them that you don't need to have the striking surface on both sides of the matchbox. You can just have it on one side of the matchbox. Right. So as the tea bags come off the production line, if you have the machine in place that cuts all the paired ones, so they're made as a double, and then the thing comes down to seal the two tea bags, and it would be an extra process in the production line that would then cut the double tea bag in half. And by dint of not having that extra process, your tea bag is cheaper.
And it's half the energy to actually make the tea bag, and cost potentially as well.
Bing, bang, bong.
Well, why don't they all do it then?
Because they are prioritising different things. Because of you. Because of you being annoyed. Because
I'm assuming. I picked the phone up straight away. You was on the radio.
Yeah, I know.
James will know, and it turns out you do.
But Yorkshire tea customers, dare I say, are probably a bit tight. So they're gonna notice, and I say this is the son of two Yorkshire people. They're going to be a little bit. So maybe per tea bag, the cost per tea bag is a little bit less than it would be for a tea bag where they paid to have it chopped in half.
Because I wondered if it was just a case of, if you want a really strong tea, you just throw both tea bags.
No, you wouldn't need to. They wouldn't need to be joined together.
Yeah, this was my point. Yeah.
No, I think that's what it is. I think that's what I mean. And other ones may come in too. As Rebecca tells me that PG Tips do now as well. But okay. or it could be if we're going to go full Yorkshire. Your point may stand. William claims that it is so that because you're going to put two in the pot if you're making a pot, but that doesn't really work because many more people are going to be using it for. You don't need to have them stuck together to chuck them in the pot. You could just chuck two.
Yeah,
I think it'll be a cost thing. I think it would have saved a few quid. I'm taking a round of applause.
By dint to the fact that you think and not know, can we stick it on the board?
No.
Oh, James.
All right then. I'm taking a round of applause, but I'll allow a steward's inquiry.
Thank you, James.
No, thank you. Take care, Steve. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. As the dust settles on those announcements made overnight, it's a couple of things we missed perhaps in the first hour, but we'll return to. It's going to be much worse news. The poorer the country, the harder the hit, I think. A country like Laos and Vietnam hit with incredibly high tariffs. The idea that they have been somehow mistreating the United States of America is ridiculous. They can't afford to buy many American goods, but they can boost their own relatively weak economies by selling homemade goods overseas. It's an act of brutal ignorance or ignorant brutality, whichever you prefer. Anyway, back to Mystery Hour, an altogether happier place. Simon is in Littlehampton. Simon, question or answer?
Hi, James. Question for you.
Yeah.
So I'm type 1 diabetic, like many, and I inject my liquid insulin morning and evening, eat during the day, and obviously that looks after everything. The insulin goes into my arm and obviously gets absorbed into the bloodstream, and it just suddenly occurred to me recently, why can't I just drink it?
Don't try.
Oh, no, I'm not going to do that.
No, not until at least we get an answer.
Oh, yeah, sure.
No, nobody. I'm joking.
For 26 years, I've avoided drinking it. So
yeah.
But it's an absorption thing, isn't it?
Well, there's a few things. I mean, I don't think at the moment when we had IVF and my wife had to inject herself, there was no option to drink it. I mean, it's not just going to apply to insulin, is it?
No, true.
It's it's not like you have to find a vein like Zamo Maguire on Grange Hill or anything like that in order to inject it. I mean, it could just taste gross, could it? Could be not very good.
It probably would.
But you'd have thought by now, with it being, as you say, such a common condition, that someone would have come up with a much less potentially traumatic way of administering it.
When I was first diagnosed, it was a tricky thing to handle, but once you get used to it, you just go with it. It's like brushing your teeth in the morning. You just stick a needle in. It doesn't hurt. It's a fine needle.
No, good. I mean, I like the question. It'll probably have quite a straightforward answer, but it'd be nice to know it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and it could factor in future way of
developments.
That it is development and it is taken in the future, maybe.
Let's not get carried away, Simon. I mean, it'd be good to get an answer. To invent a new way of taking insulin as a consequence of you ringing up Mystery is, let's be frank, it's unlikely, mate, isn't it?
But if I did, there'd be a couple of boxes coming my way.
That's this time next year, Rodney. It's 12:30.
I'll be Dr. Westwood.
12:37 is the time. I love that. Yeah, you're right. If anyone does come up with a new way of administering insulin orally as a consequence of this moment on Mystery Hour, then make sure you send a couple of boxes Simon's way. All right. Matt's in Crystal Palace. Matt, question or answer?
Answer.
Carry on.
So it's your film set one, and your film, your crime drama.
Yes.
You nailed it. Suspension of disbelief.
Tell me more.
We want to believe, right? So you put aside your critical thinking skills and your rationale that, like, I know it's real. I know it's on the television. It's not happening in front of me. And yeah, we suspend our disbelief willingly because for the enjoyment of the narrative.
And so willingly, but not consciously, as it were. Because it happens. Because if it was really bad acting,
if you will something into your existence, your understanding of the world, then what is the difference between willing and conscious? Because you've made a conscious decision to suspend your disbelief that it is fake.
But if it was really bad acting, then it would break your decision, which makes me think it's subconscious.
I don't know. I generally try and watch bad TV.
Yeah, well, no, but I mean, there isn't. I can't think of any examples, and it wouldn't be fair even if I could to mention them out loud. But that's the point, isn't it?
Oh, there's that film that's like the worst film of all time. Anybody, they've leaned into the acceptance of, like, their golden raspberries, or whatever the awards are called. But yeah, I think, and extra bonus marks, the originator of the suspension disbelief phrase is Samuel Coleridge.
Is it?
Yeah.
That's nice.
I can't remember what.
That's all right.
What
nice play. Qualifications?
I work in the creative arts, on film sets, on adverts, on gigs, concerts.
So you've given a lot of thought to this, and it must be, there is something going on. It's almost like a treaty. It's almost like a contract, isn't it, with the creator? Is that there is no point me doing this unless, on some level, I believe that it's real.
Exactly.
Happens in the theatre. I mean, you, as soon as you forget it's real, and that happens more often because of the context, probably. You forget that it's real and you get a bit bored. But as long as you're thinking it's real, you can't look away.
Was it the number of was when you said about, like, the number of times you looked at your phone, or how many times you checked your phone?
Yeah, that's right. That was my old mate, actually, when he was reviewing me appearing in a school play. Round of applause for Matt there. I like that one. Well played, Matt. Dell's in Telford, or is Tell in Delford? Question or answer?
It's Dell in Telford.
Carry on, Dell. Question or answer?
It's a question, please.
Yes.
So, I was just thinking about the other day, because I went to watch a snooker. Why do we have to stay quiet at the snooker, but when we're at the darts, because I was at the darts last year, it's so raucous, it's unbelievable, but the concentration level's the same?
I've actually had that thought, and I've even had that thought I must ask that on Mystery Hour, but then, as with jokes, I never remember them. I always forget the thing that I thought I was going to watch on so I'm very grateful to you for asking me that. And I mean, there must be reasons, right? But they've got so much in common. It's one-on-one. It's a refereed gladiatorial contest between two titans of the game, the relative games, and it involves enormous levels of concentration, best evinced by the fact that you can both get the yips. Snooker players and darts players can both get the yips, or dartitis, I think they call it in the case of darts players, and yet one is beyond raucous. One is, I mean, literally.
Yeah. Nobody ever says stand up if you love the snooker.
Stand up if you love the snooker. No, they don't. And in fact, you can't really do anything at the snooker without getting told off by the referee. And yet,
I was whispering really, really quietly, and the referee just stared at me.
Really?
Just like, yeah.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, it may be marketing. That they may have just decided over the years that as the crowds have got bigger.
Yeah, it's been happening for years. I remember watching snooker when I was a kid with my dad.
No, the snooker has never been rowdy.
Not the snooker, sorry, the darts. Where Jockey Wilson having a pint on the stage, and
Wasn't that rowdy then, though?
But it was still noisy.
It was noisier than the snooker. So, well, we will find out for you. I love that. Why do two often twinned pastimes, because you can play them both in pubs, why on the professional stage does one unfold in relative silence while one unfolds with a right almighty racket going on in the background? Well, not even in the background, it's often in the foreground. It's a miracle they can hear themselves think. And goodness me, it must make a difference. Imagine the mental strength you'd have to ignore the fact that the whole of Ali Pali is booing you when you step up to the oche. I know that is, that's sports psychology territory, that is. I love that question. That's one of my favourites in a long time. Dale, thank you. Did you have a nice time at the snooker?
Oh yeah, it was great, and the darts was fantastic as well last year. Managed to get VIP seats as well. So.
Oh, get you! I've been to the darts, and it is an absolute ball. But I've never managed to go to the snooker. I keep saying to one of my oldest mates that we'll go one year. We'll go to Sheffield and do it properly for the Crucible. But you know what life is like, mate. Also, what would you do without me every day? 12:43 is the time. Halla is in Acton. Halla, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on, Halla.
Can you guess which one?
Yes. What with you being a world-renowned pharmacist and everything, it is probably going to be the insulin question.
Yes. World-renowned in my house. The reason why you can't take insulin orally is because it's made of a group of peptides, which are building blocks of protein.
Okay.
And if it's taken orally, it will become destroyed by the digestive enzymes, and it will render it ineffective.
Oh, so if it went through the stomach, it would no longer be insulin?
Yes.
That's
yes,
pretty obvious.
And it will not have its desired effect.
And that would be true of almost everything that we inject, or everything that we inject?
Exactly. Most things that we inject, the reason will be because there is the digestive enzymes, there are some other drugs that go through the liver, and again, if they are destroyed by the liver, they'll be no good for the absorption.
We love that. Thank you, Halla. Perfect answer. Round of applause.
Thank you. It's my third.
Yes, it's been a while, but that means there's not going to be any boxes of orally administered, suddenly invented insulin making its way to Simon anytime soon.
I'm not going to say anything because, I'm an old hand, so things might be developing.
Who knows? Who knows? Exactly that. 12:44. Thank you, Halla. Squeeze in one more. Matt's in Bradford. Matt, question or answer?
It's a Stewards inquiry for you, James.
On the tee?
On the tee, yeah.
Go on, then.
I
knew that because you're in Bradford.
I believe that it's not to do with cost saving. I think it's because of the shape of the tea bags. They can then stack them and they fit into the boxes better and they don't topple over on the production line as well.
I think you're right. And in fact, the perforation suggests that there has been an extra level to the production process, doesn't it?
Otherwise, so you can still tear them if you're careful, unlike your previous caller.
So Simon obviously wasn't careful enough. I'm glad you pointed that out. I didn't feel it was my place. But and then that would mean that probably all tea bags are like, all tea bags packed in boxes are like that as well. So the only ones that wouldn't be are the pyramids.
I believe so, because you can't stack a pyramid.
You probably can, but only in a pyramid.
Depends what plane we're working in here.
That's a phrase you don't hear on many phone-ins, but yeah, it does depend. What place? Qualifications?
I'm a Yorkshireman, drinker of Yorkshire tea for over 20 years. I'm sure that'll do it.
There it'll go. There it goes. Round of applause for Matt, please. I love that. And it is 12:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:48. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I did some lovely questions today. The ones that we haven't got answers to yet include sun cream. Does it diminish in efficacy with every passing minute after application? How do we learn to fall out of beds? Why do copper coins reputedly prolong the freshness of cut flowers? Why did Peter's phone start telling him about water filters after he moved into a new house and noticed a water filter? Ants, how do they communicate? Apparently it's not antennae. We've done the suspension of disbelief, we've done the tea bags, we've done the diabetics. And why do we play snooker in silence at the highest level while playing darts in circumstances of incredible raucousness? I need some answers. I don't need any more questions. Oh, no offence, Brian. I'll be with you in a minute. But so you need to ring me now if you can answer any of those questions. You'll get through as well. It's nearly home time. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Apparently, David says pyramid tea bags are no longer available as a consequence of cost cutting. I do not know whether that is true or not, but I do need answers to the sun cream question, Peter's phone, the copper coins, the falling out of bed, the ants communication, and the darts versus snooker audience-based inquiry. All right? Brian is in Lambister in mid Wales. Brian, question or answer?
It's a question, James.
Carry on, Brian.
In the 8 years I've lived in this location,
yes,
I take my dog up on the common, the local common, for a walk twice a day.
Lovely.
That common is covered in gorse bushes.
Oh, yes.
Now, the question is, why do gorse bushes flower every month of the year?
These are the bright yellow ones?
They are, yes. And when I walk around, every month of the year, I can find at least one or two bushes that are in full flower. Evolution must have done it, but why?
Yeah, we like that. Isn't there an old saying out of it? When gorse is out of bloom, kissing is out of season or something? When gorse is... that means you can kiss all year round, you see.
Exactly.
So why do... I mean, they do. Why? Because they pollinate all year.
It must be evolution that does it, but I can't see why there's an advantage in flowering in the middle of winter.
No,
but I take photographs every month of the year of at least one bush in flower.
Do you? And they get better. They go up and down. They're not exactly the same quality of at the same time of year. About February, I think March, they're at their most beautiful, just before spring.
No, I would disagree.
Well, that's fighting talk, Brian. That's fighting talk. That is.
I can take a photograph of a bush in full flower in January, and it's just as bright and cheerful as it is in August.
Okay,
well, not that particular bush. It'll be a different bush.
Oh.
But that's the thing. It's not.
Might be like the Borg in Star Trek. It might be like one consciousness with different manifestations in different places. So when one blossoms, I'll find out for you. Well, I'll try, but I'm short of time, Brian, and I'm short of answers. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need if you can tell me, and indeed Brian and everybody else, why gorse bushes flower all year round. Mark's in Richmond. Mark, question or answer?
Answer, I hope.
Yeah.
That brilliant question, the one about darts and snooker,
yes.
The difference between the crowd behaviour.
Yes.
Just an educated guess, but question of social context. One's a club game and the other one's a pub game. So darts, you play it in a pub. There's a lot of people drinking. There would have been smoking in the past. You get used to playing it around noise. It's just part of the social conventions and the milieu around that whole game. And you logically transpose that into the live arena for a professional match. If you look at snooker, though, it started as a kind of a drawing room game for the upper classes, I believe, as billiards, and then it got transposed into temperance billiard halls. You know, I was saying to your researcher about 100 years ago, plus when there was a big temperance movement, they used to build these places, snooker and billiard halls. You may remember ones from where you grew up, or you may have seen them, you know, old buildings.
Yeah.
You don't want to drink, you play snooker, you've got to concentrate on the game,
Quakers,
it keeps your mind off the drinking.
It would have been popular in Bourneville and places like that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, there used to be one down the road in West Bromwich, where I grew up. You know, I don't know whether it's still there. It's changed a lot, an old temperance billiard hall. And then if you think about it, after that, you've got to go to a snooker club.
This is a very educated guess.
But also that would account for the clothes that they wear for the snooker as well. You know, going back to the old Joe Davis days, in the waistcoats, the dicky bows, and of course going round exhibition matches. You want to see a player. You might have a club player going up against a professional like Joe Davis. It's all quiet. It's all hush hush. You're learning.
I think you've done it. I'm going to interrupt you because I sense if I don't, you'll still be talking towards the end of Sheila's programme. But I'm also going to give you a round of applause to soften the blow of my last insult.
What's that then?
Well, no, it's just a round of applause. The insult was the fact that you talk about as much as I do. So it's a good job there aren't any donkeys here with hind legs. They'd all be doomed. Well played, Mark. I like that. Qualifications, what? I love snooker.
It is. I love snooker.
You know what you should have said?
What's that?
I'm snooker loopy.
Yeah, there you go.
Next time. Reese is in Birmingham. Reese, question or answer?
Answer.
Carry on.
So the question is to how ants communicate. It's quite simple. Ants communicate using pheromones, very similar to hormones. and they will leave the equivalent of scent trails in places based on where they've been and where they're going.
So that might be where they stop to have a bit of a chat when they've stumbled across a scent trail.
Yeah, quite literally. So they'll come across a scent trail, even if it's not one from their own colony as well. They will recognise that instantly and be able to relay that information.
Answer. Qualifications?
Back to me, I don't have any. I just watch a channel called Ants Canada on YouTube, and
that's a qualification.
That will tell everybody.
That's a qualification, Reece. You might not, put it on your CV necessarily, depending on what jobs you're applying for, but that, in the context of Mystery Hour, that is a perfectly reasonable qualification. And is it just about Canadian ants?
No. So that's literally just the name of the channel. If I remember rightly, the actual guy that runs the channel, he lives somewhere in Asia.
Why is it called Ants Canada then?
I think originally he did live in Canada, and
it's all about ants.
His channel. It's about ants, cockroaches, all these kind of little life forms.
Fantastic, insect. I love it. I love it. And you've just probably given him a little bit of a boost on his following, or at least his views. Round of applause for Reece, please.
Cheers.
Thank you. Jeff's in Bishop's Stortford. Jeff, question or answer?
I've got an answer for you, James.
Go on then, Jeff.
This should be a good one.
Yes.
It's sun factor.
Oh, yes.
Now, I'll be quick and brief as I can, but it's very, very, very interesting. It's made up
I'll be the judge of that, Jeffrey. Carry on.
Fine. It's made up of different compounds, organic and inorganic. The organic ones get absorbed into your skin,
yes,
so it no longer reflects the UVA, UVB light.
Yes.
The inorganic ones, which are the ones that look like you've got emulsion painted all over you,
yes,
stay on the surface and reflect it. Okay? It's also based upon how much you sweat and how much you swim. Sweating will dilute your sun factor, so you'll get an exponential curve going up more steeply. The other thing to remember...
So you could... you'd have to do a different one per brand because they'll all have slightly different recipes, but you could plot a graph of efficacy with variables for sweating and swimming.
You could do it, but also you have to remember that the factor number, say you put on a 30 versus a 50 or an 85, increasing the factor number doesn't increase your protection the same amount increase of the number. So for 50, if you put a 30 on, you might prevent yourself from getting 90% of the injury is concerned. A 50 might only give you 93%. An 80 might only give you 97%, and 100 might only give you 98%. So increasing the number doesn't mean you get the same relative.
Doesn't double, it increases. Okay,
no.
So you lost me a bit towards the end, but you still get a round of applause. Okay. What are your qualifications?
Well, I've got more to tell you.
No, you haven't. What are your qualifications?
Oh, okay.
Sheila's here.
I was working in New Zealand for 6 months, and I went to see a local doctor who told me about the...
Mate, that's perfect. Round of applause for Jeff. Absolutely vintage Mystery Hour. Colin's in Brent. Question or answer?
Hi, an answer about the advertising.
Give me a minute. Take a minute. You can't have longer. Maybe even 30 seconds. Take it away.
It's very hard to do it in 30 seconds.
Well, you're going to have to try.
Meinhofen phenomenon, frequency illusion. It's all about the abuse of consent in the online advertising system.
Well, no, it isn't on this one. I think it is. Apparently, water filters have been on a bit of a roll advertising lately, and because he just saw one. You know when you buy a new car, Colin?
Yep.
And you're driving around and you suddenly notice all the other cars that are the same make?
Yes, that's the frequency illusion.
It's the frequency illusion. That's what's happened here. Qualifications?
Yeah, but it's I ran the online advertising systems for a very, very large organisation, 10 billion monthly impressions.
Look at that.
But it's audience-based advertising versus contextual advertising. When you click the consent dialogue on a website, you are agreeing to share information about everyone in your household. If your phones ever use the Wi-Fi as a hotspot.
This is the point at which I wish Colin had gone. I wish you'd gone earlier, because you've already made a lot of ears prick up, and it's something we should be talking about more. And you get a round of applause. I didn't write his name down, but my darts snooker answer from the lad from the Brummie in Richmond. The Brummie in Richmond who answered the darts snooker question. Was it Mark? Yeah, Mark gets it this week, because I loved that answer. I thought it was... When someone says it's an educated guess, I'm not going to lie, my heart sinks.
Why?
I don't know. I just think that we're about to have a bit of an exercise in pomposity.
Yeah, does that always happen?
No, because that was an educated guess, and he was really educated. He brought so much to the table. He's just won himself a Mystery Hour board game.
Well, what more could he want?
What more indeed. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily. The best bits of my show in a 60-minute slot every single day. Download it except weekends. Download it because there's no show. Download it now for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Sawbrick will be with you at 4 on LBC, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.